The aftermath of the Horus Heresy left the Imperium scarred and fundamentally transformed. As the dust settled from that catastrophic civil war in the early 31st millennium, Roboute Guilliman's Codex Astartes emerged as the blueprint for restructuring the Loyalist Space Marine legions. The document mandated the division of these massive formations into smaller, more manageable chapters of approximately 1,000 warriors each. This second founding represented both a practical necessity and a symbolic rebirth for the Emperor's finest warriors. Among the Imperial Fists Legion, which had endured the Siege of Terra alongside their Primarch Rogel Dorn, the implementation of Guilliman's reforms proved particularly significant. The 7th Legion had suffered tremendous losses during the final battles against Horus and his traitor forces, yet their gene seed remained pure and their martial traditions intact. When the time came for division, several successor chapters emerged from the Imperial Fists' genetic legacy, each carrying forward different aspects of Dorn's teachings and the Legion's warrior culture. The Crimson Fists represented one of the most prominent of these successor chapters, drawing their initial membership from veteran companies that had distinguished themselves during the heresy's darkest hours. These were not fresh recruits or hastily trained neophytes, but battle-hardened space marines who had witnessed the Emperor's near death and fought to preserve the Imperium against impossible odds. Their experience in urban warfare, siegecraft, and defensive operations formed the foundation upon which the new chapter would build its identity. The selection process for the chapter's leadership drew from the Imperial Fists' most capable officers. Veterans who had served directly under Rogel Dorn and survived the brutal campaigns of the heresy found themselves tasked with establishing new traditions while preserving the essential character of their parent legion. These founding members understood that they carried not just the genetic legacy of their Primarch, but the responsibility to interpret his teachings for a new era of warfare. The newly formed Crimson Fists required a homeworld that could serve both strategic and symbolic purposes. After careful consideration by the chapter's leadership and consultation with Imperial cartographers, they selected Rynn's world, a planet located in the Loki sector near the borders of Imperial space. This choice reflected both practical considerations and the chapter's intended role within the broader Imperial military structure. Rynn's world presented an ideal combination of strategic location and recruitment potential. Positioned along critical shipping lanes and close to the volatile frontier regions where Xeno's threats remained constant, the planet offered the chapter immediate opportunities to fulfill their duties as defenders of humanity. The world's location in the Loki sector placed it within reasonable distance of other Imperial strongholds, while maintaining sufficient independence to develop the chapter's unique character. The planet itself displayed the characteristics that Space Marine chapters typically sought in a homeworld. Rynn's world possessed diverse terrain that would challenge recruits and provide varied training environments. Mountain ranges offered opportunities for endurance testing and high-altitude operations, while dense forests and rocky badlands presented different tactical scenarios. The world's climate, while not as harsh as some Space Marine recruitment worlds, still demanded resilience and adaptability from its inhabitants. Most importantly, Rynn's world's feudal society provided an ideal recruiting ground for the Crimson Fists. The planet's population had organized itself into numerous small kingdoms and city-states, each maintaining their own military traditions and codes of honor. This decentralized political structure meant that warfare remained a constant reality for the inhabitants, as rival factions competed for resources and territory. Young men grew up understanding concepts of duty, loyalty, and martial prowess that aligned closely with Space Marine values. The feudal nature of Rynn's world society also meant that its people possessed the mental flexibility to accept the Crimson Fists as their new overlords without significant resistance. The concept of powerful warriors ruling from fortress strongholds fit naturally within their existing worldview. Local nobles and military leaders recognized that cooperation with the Space Marines offered protection and prestige that far exceeded anything they could achieve through traditional feudal alliances. Construction of the chapter's fortress-monastery began shortly after their arrival on Rynn's world. The Crimson Fists selected a site that maximized both defensive potential and symbolic impact. Rising from a series of interconnected peaks in one of the planet's major mountain ranges, the fortress commanded sweeping views of the surrounding territory while providing natural barriers against potential attackers. The fortress-monastery's design reflected both Imperial Fists' architectural traditions and adaptations to Rynn's world-specific environment. Massive walls of reinforced ceramite and adamantium rose from the mountain faces themselves, creating the impression that the structure had grown organically from the stone. Gun emplacements and void shield generators integrated seamlessly with the natural rock formations, making the fortress appear simultaneously ancient and technologically advanced. Within these walls, the Crimson Fists established all the facilities necessary for a Space Marine chapter's operations. Training halls where neophytes would learn the basics of combat, armories housing the chapter's weapons and equipment, apothecariums for medical treatment and gene seed cultivation, and libraries containing tactical knowledge and chapter histories. The fortress also included manufacturing facilities capable of producing ammunition, basic equipment, and maintenance supplies, ensuring the chapter's operational independence. The recruitment practices established by the Crimson Fists drew directly from Rynn's world's feudal culture, while adapting Imperial Fists traditions to local conditions. Rather than simply taking the strongest young men from each settlement, the chapter developed a more nuanced approach that considered the complex social dynamics of feudal society. They established formal agreements with various noble houses and military orders, creating a system where service to the Crimson Fists represented the highest honor a family could achieve. Potential recruits typically came to the chapter's attention through displays of exceptional courage, skill, or leadership during local conflicts. The constant low-level warfare between Rynn's world's various factions provided numerous opportunities for young warriors to distinguish themselves. Crimson Fist scouts maintained regular contact with trusted allies among the local nobility, ensuring that promising candidates received proper evaluation regardless of their social origins. The selection trials themselves combined traditional Space Marine testing methods with challenges specifically designed to evaluate qualities valued by the Imperial Fists and their successors. Physical endurance remained paramount, but the Crimson Fists also emphasized mental resilience, tactical thinking, and the ability to function effectively under extreme stress. Candidates faced scenarios that tested their capacity for independent decision-making while maintaining loyalty to their superiors and brothers. During these trials, the chapter's leadership looked for specific characteristics that aligned with their developing identity. Stubbornness and refusal to yield in the face of overwhelming odds ranked highly, reflecting the Imperial Fists' legendary defensive capabilities. However, the Crimson Fists also valued adaptability and the ability to recognize when tactical flexibility served better than rigid adherence to doctrine. This balance between steadfast determination and practical wisdom would become a defining characteristic of the chapter's approach to warfare. The development of the chapter's unique culture occurred gradually as the original Imperial Fists veterans integrated with recruits drawn from Rynn's world's population. This process created a synthesis between the martial traditions inherited from Rogel Dorn and the feudal honor codes prevalent among the planet's inhabitants. The resulting culture emphasized personal honor, loyalty to one's brothers, and an unwavering commitment to protecting Imperial citizens from all threats. Central to this emerging identity was the concept of earned brotherhood. While all Space Marines shared genetic heritage through their Primarch's gene seed, the Crimson Fists developed additional bonds based on shared trials and mutual respect. Veterans from the Imperial Fists Legion served as mentors and teachers, passing down not just tactical knowledge, but also the deeper philosophical understanding that had sustained them through the heresy's darkest moments. The integration of Rynn's world's feudal traditions proved particularly significant in shaping the chapter's internal structure and ceremonies. Local customs regarding oaths of fealty and codes of chivalric conduct found new expression within the Space Marine framework. Battle Brothers swore personal oaths to their sergeants and officers that went beyond standard military hierarchy, creating networks of mutual obligation and support that strengthened unit cohesion. These cultural adaptations also influenced the chapter's relationship with Rynn's world's civilian population. Rather than maintaining the distant, godlike presence typical of many Space Marine chapters, the Crimson Fists developed a more integrated approach to planetary governance. They respected local customs and traditions, while gradually introducing improvements in technology, medicine, and military organization that benefited the entire population. The selection of the chapter's heraldry and iconography represented a deliberate break from their Imperial Fists origins while maintaining connection to their genetic heritage. The Crimson Gauntlet that would become their primary symbol emerged from discussions among the chapter's founding leadership about how best to represent their new identity. The choice reflected multiple layers of meaning that resonated with both their Space Marine nature and their connection to Rynn's world. The crimson color itself carried significant symbolism within Imperial military tradition. Red represented sacrifice, courage, and the blood shed in defense of humanity's future. For the Crimson Fists, this color choice emphasized their commitment to standing between Imperial citizens and the countless threats that sought to destroy them. The deep, rich shade they selected differed markedly from the bright reds used by other chapters, suggesting both nobility and the serious nature of their duties. The gauntlet symbol reinforced themes of strength, protection, and direct action. Unlike more abstract or mystical iconography favored by some chapters, the fist represented something immediately understandable to both Space Marines and ordinary humans. It suggested the chapter's readiness to physically confront enemies and their preference for straightforward, decisive action over complex strategies or subtle manipulation. The decision to display this crimson gauntlet on their left hands carried additional significance within Space Marine tradition. The left hand typically held defensive equipment such as shields or served as the non-dominant hand in combat. By marking this hand in crimson, the Crimson Fists emphasized their role as protectors and their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others' safety. The symbol served as a constant reminder of their duties and the price they were prepared to pay to fulfill them. This heraldry also reflected the chapter's connection to Rynn's world's feudal culture. The gauntlet resembled the armored gloves worn by knights and nobles during formal ceremonies, creating a visual link between the Space Marines and local traditions of honor and service. Citizens of Rynn's world could easily understand and respect a symbol that connected to their own cultural heritage while representing the superhuman warriors who protected them. The name Crimson Fists emerged naturally from these heraldic choices, but it also carried deeper implications for the chapter's identity and mission. The combination of color and symbol created an image of controlled violence and disciplined strength. Unlike names that emphasized destruction or conquest, Crimson Fists suggested warriors who fought not for glory or personal gain, but out of necessity and duty to others. This naming choice also distinguished the chapter from their Imperial Fists parent legion while maintaining thematic connections. Both names emphasized the physical instruments of war, but where Imperial Fists suggested the broader scope of the Emperor's military might, Crimson Fists implied a more personal, immediate form of protection. The chapter would fight not as distant representatives of Imperial authority, but as guardians directly connected to the people they defended. The symbolic framework established during these early years would prove remarkably durable, surviving thousands of years and countless battles, while continuing to inspire new generations of Crimson Fists. The careful balance between inherited Imperial Fists traditions and locally derived cultural elements created a foundation strong enough to support the chapter through future trials, while flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. As the 31st millennium progressed and the Crimson Fists established themselves on Rynn's world, these foundational elements began to influence every aspect of chapter operations. Training regimens incorporated both Imperial Fists' tactical doctrines and fighting techniques inspired by local martial traditions. Recruitment practices balanced the need for genetic compatibility with recognition of the diverse talents found among Rynn's world's feudal societies. The 41st millennium had brought the Crimson Fists nearly 10,000 years of honorable service to the Imperium. By the year 989 of the 41st millennium, The chapter had evolved into a formidable fighting force, their fortress-monastery standing as an impregnable bastion overlooking the civilized regions of Rynn's world. The planet itself had prospered under Space Marine protection, its population growing to support numerous hive cities and industrial complexes that contributed significantly to the sector's military production. New Rynn City had become the planet's primary urban center, a sprawling metropolis housing millions of Imperial citizens whose daily lives depended on the continued vigilance of their superhuman protectors. Chapter Master Pedro Cantor commanded the Crimson Fists during this period, a veteran warrior whose tactical acumen and unwavering dedication to the chapter's traditions had earned him the respect of his battle brothers and the admiration of Imperial commanders throughout the Loki sector. Under his leadership, the chapter maintained its strength at near full capacity, with approximately 1,000 Space Marines organized into 10 companies, according to Codex Astartes doctrine. The fortress-monastery's armories contained centuries of accumulated weapons and equipment, while the chapter's fleet provided rapid response capabilities across their operational theater. The orbital defense systems protecting Rynn's world represented some of the most sophisticated military technology available to Space Marine chapters. Massive laser batteries positioned on the planet's surface could engage targets in high orbit with devastating accuracy, while void shield generators protected key installations from orbital bombardment. These defenses had been continuously upgraded and maintained over the millennia, incorporating new technologies and tactical improvements developed by the chapter's tech marines in cooperation with the Adeptus Mechanicus. The first indications of the approaching catastrophe came through routine astropathic communications from Imperial Navy patrol vessels operating along the sector's outer boundaries. Reports described unusual warp disturbances and the massing of Xenos vessels in previously uninhabited systems. These initial warnings, while concerning, did not immediately suggest the scale of the threat that was developing beyond the Imperium's borders. Ork incursions had occurred regularly throughout the chapter's history, and the Crimson Fists had successfully repelled numerous greenskin raids over the centuries. Warlord Snagrod had spent decades building his power base in the wild regions beyond Imperial control, gradually unifying disparate Ork clans under his brutal leadership. Unlike typical Ork warlords who relied primarily on brute force and intimidation, Snagrod demonstrated an unusual degree of strategic thinking and long-term planning. His forces had captured and fortified numerous worlds, establishing supply lines and manufacturing centers that could support sustained military campaigns rather than simple raiding expeditions. The Waaagh that Snagrod unleashed represented one of the largest Ork invasions the Loki sector had ever faced. Intelligence estimates suggested that millions of greenskins had been assembled for the assault, supported by thousands of ramshackle but effective warships, countless attack craft, and the massive industrial capacity needed to sustain such a force across interstellar distances. The sheer scale of the invasion fleet defied conventional Imperial understanding of Ork organizational capabilities. When the first elements of Snagrod's Waaagh entered the Rynn's world system in the year 989 of the 41st millennium, they encountered the chapter's patrol vessels conducting routine security sweeps. The initial engagements demonstrated both the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Ork forces and their surprising tactical coordination. Rather than the chaotic, disorganized assault typical of greenskin attacks, Snagrod's forces executed coordinated strikes that systematically eliminated Imperial early warning systems and communication relays. The Ork invasion fleet consisted of hundreds of capital ships accompanied by thousands of smaller vessels, ranging from crude but effective battleships to swarms of fighter bombers and assault boats. Many of these craft had been constructed using salvaged Imperial technology, giving them capabilities that exceeded typical Ork engineering standards. The fleet's composition suggested careful planning and resource allocation, rather than the haphazard construction methods usually associated with greenskin military production. Pedro Cantor recognized the severity of the threat as soon as detailed reports reached the fortress-monastery. The chapter's entire strength would be needed to defend Rynn's world against such massive numbers, and even then, victory was far from certain. Emergency protocols activated throughout the planet as PDF regiments mobilized and civilian populations began evacuation procedures from exposed settlements. The Crimson Fist's battle companies prepared for deployment, while the chapter's fleet moved to intercept the advancing Ork armada. The space battle that followed demonstrated both the courage of the Crimson Fists and the overwhelming nature of their opposition. The chapter's strike cruisers and escort vessels fought with characteristic determination, their crews executing complex tactical maneuvers designed to maximize damage against superior numbers. Boarding actions saw Space Marines fighting desperate battles in the cramped corridors of Ork vessels, their bolt weapons and chainswords carving through masses of howling greenskins. Despite their tactical skill and superior training, the Crimson Fists could not prevent significant numbers of Ork vessels from reaching Rynn's world's orbital space. The planet's defense systems engaged targets throughout the system, their powerful laser batteries destroying numerous enemy ships and disrupting Ork landing operations. However, the sheer volume of attacking craft meant that many assault boats and drop pods successfully penetrated the defensive perimeter. The tragedy that would define the campaign began with what should have been a moment of triumph. The fortress-monastery's primary orbital defense laser had acquired a target-rich environment as Ork landing craft descended toward the planet's surface in massive waves. The weapon system's machine spirit had been consecrated and maintained according to ancient rituals, its targeting arrays calibrated to deliver precise strikes against orbital targets while avoiding friendly forces and civilian installations. As the massive laser prepared to fire at a concentration of Ork vessels approaching the northern continent, a catastrophic malfunction occurred within the weapon's targeting systems. The exact nature of the failure remained unclear, but the result was immediately apparent as the colossal energy beam diverted from its intended trajectory. Instead of striking the descending Ork fleet, the laser carved directly through the fortress-monastery itself, penetrating multiple levels of reinforced armor and striking the chapter's ammunition storage facilities. The explosion that followed could be seen from orbit as secondary detonations rippled through the fortress-monastery's lower levels. Thousands of tons of bolt rounds, plasma charges, and missile warheads detonated simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that gutted entire sections of the ancient structure. The blast wave shattered windows in settlements hundreds of kilometers away, while the seismic shock registered on monitoring equipment across the planet. Within moments, centuries of accumulated weapons, equipment, and irreplaceable artifacts were reduced to twisted metal and radioactive debris. The chapter's armory, containing enough weapons to equip several companies, simply ceased to exist. Vehicle bays housing precious Rhino transports, Predator tanks, and Land Raiders collapsed under the weight of falling masonry and molten metal. Most tragically, hundreds of Space Marines died instantly as entire sections of the fortress-monastery were vaporized or buried under millions of tons of rubble. Pedro Cantor survived the initial explosion through a combination of fortune and the robust construction of the command center, where he had been coordinating the defense. The chapter master found himself trapped beneath debris, his power armor systems damaged but functional, listening to the screams and shouts of his battle brothers echoing through the ruined corridors. The communications network had been severed, making it impossible to determine the full extent of casualties or coordinate rescue operations. The few Crimson Fists who survived the catastrophe faced an impossible situation. Their fortress monastery lay in ruins, their equipment and weapons destroyed, and their numbers reduced to a fraction of full strength. Worse still, the Ork invasion continued unabated, with landing craft depositing thousands of greenskins across Rynn's world's surface. The planet's PDF forces, deprived of Space Marine support and coordination, struggled to mount effective resistance against the overwhelming enemy numbers. As Cantor and the surviving battle brothers extracted themselves from the wreckage, they confronted the magnitude of their losses. Entire companies had been wiped out in the explosion, including many of the chapter's most experienced sergeants and specialists. The Apothecarian, with its precious gene seed storage facilities, had been completely destroyed, potentially ending the chapter's ability to create new space marines. The Reclusium, containing the chapter's sacred banners and relics, existed only as a crater filled with radioactive slag. The Ork forces landing across Rynn's world showed no mercy to the civilian population. Snagrod's warriors had been promised unlimited opportunities for violence and plunder, and they set about fulfilling these expectations with characteristic brutality. Settlements burned as greenskin mobs rampaged through the countryside, while larger Ork formations advanced toward the planet's major population centers. The few PDF units that attempted to resist were quickly overwhelmed by enemies who outnumbered them dozens to one. New Rynn City became the focal point of human resistance as refugees from across the planet sought shelter within its walls. The city's defensive systems, while formidable by civilian standards, had never been designed to withstand a full-scale Ork invasion. Governor Maya Kaglistra worked desperately to coordinate evacuation efforts and organize the city's defenses, but the situation appeared hopeless without significant military support. Pedro Cantor made the decision that would define both his legacy and the chapter's future when he led the surviving Crimson Fists toward New Rynn City. With fewer than 40 Space Marines remaining combat effective and virtually no heavy equipment, the chapter master understood that conventional tactics would prove inadequate against the massive Ork forces converging on the city. Instead, the Crimson Fists would have to rely on their training, determination, and intimate knowledge of urban warfare inherited from their Imperial Fists gene seed. The march to New Rynn City took the survivors through devastated countryside where evidence of Ork brutality littered the landscape. Burned settlements, destroyed vehicles, and the remains of PDF units that had attempted to slow the greenskin advance served as grim reminders of the stakes involved. The few civilians they encountered told horrific stories of Ork atrocities and begged the Space Marines for protection that Cantor knew he could barely provide. The Ork forces besieging New Rynn City represented a cross-section of Snagrod's Waaagh, including elite units that had participated in numerous successful campaigns. Speed freaks mounted on crude but effective bikes and buggies harassed the city's outer defenses, while massed infantry formations prepared for direct assaults against the walls. Ork artillery pieces, constructed from salvaged materials and guided by an intuitive understanding of ballistics, began systematic bombardment of key defensive positions. When Pedro Cantor and his surviving battle brothers reached New Rynn City, they found a population on the verge of despair. The city's defenders had fought courageously, but their ammunition was running low, and their casualties mounted with each Ork assault. The arrival of the Crimson Fists, even in such reduced numbers, provided a psychological boost that proved almost as valuable as their combat capabilities. Cantor immediately began reorganizing the city's defenses according to principles derived from Imperial Fists' siege warfare doctrine. Rather than attempting to hold the entire perimeter against overwhelming odds, he concentrated the available forces at key strongpoints that could provide mutual support. PDF units were repositioned to maximize their effectiveness, while civilian volunteers received crash courses in basic combat techniques from the surviving Space Marines. The siege of New Rynn City became a grueling test of endurance that lasted for months. Ork assaults came in waves, each one probing different sections of the defensive perimeter for weaknesses that could be exploited. The Greenskins showed no concern for casualties, throwing themselves against prepared positions with suicidal determination, while their artillery maintained constant pressure on the defenders. Pedro Cantor fought alongside his battle brothers in the thick of combat, his presence inspiring both Space Marines and ordinary humans to extraordinary acts of heroism. The chapter master's tactical expertise proved invaluable in coordinating the defense, as he adapted classical siege techniques to the specific challenges posed by Ork assault methods. His ability to remain calm under extreme pressure helped maintain morale during the darkest moments of the siege. The Crimson Fists' knowledge of urban warfare, inherited from their Imperial Fists gene seed, proved crucial during the extended defense. They understood how to use buildings and city infrastructure to channel enemy attacks into killing zones, how to establish overlapping fields of fire that maximized defensive effectiveness, and how to conduct fighting withdrawals that preserved combat strength while inflicting maximum casualties on attackers. As the siege progressed, the defenders faced increasingly desperate shortages of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Ork artillery had destroyed many of the city's storage facilities, while the constant combat left little opportunity for rest or resupply. The surviving Crimson Fists pushed themselves beyond normal human endurance, their enhanced physiology allowing them to fight effectively despite wounds that would incapacitate ordinary soldiers. The arrival of Imperial reinforcements came at the moment when New Rynn City's defenses were on the verge of collapse. A relief force consisting of multiple Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and naval support had been assembled in response to astropathic distress calls transmitted before the fortress-monastery's destruction. The sight of Imperial vessels entering orbit provided hope to defenders who had begun to believe that death was their only remaining option. The counter-offensive that followed demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of coordinated Space Marine operations when properly supported. Fresh battle brothers from allied chapters brought modern equipment and full ammunition loads, while Imperial Guard artillery provided the heavy firepower needed to break up massed Ork formations. The relief force's arrival also included tech marines and support personnel who could repair damaged equipment and restore communications networks. The liberation of New Rynn City marked the beginning of a planet-wide campaign to eliminate the remaining Ork forces. Ork Waaagh, while still formidable, had lost much of its momentum during the extended siege. The death of numerous Ork leaders in the fighting around the city had disrupted their command structure, while the failure to achieve quick victory had begun to undermine greenskin morale. Pedro Cantor led the surviving Crimson Fists in the final operations to clear Rynn's world of Ork presence. Despite their reduced numbers, the chapter's battle brothers fought with grim determination to reclaim their homeworld and avenge their fallen brothers. The campaign required months of additional fighting, as scattered Ork groups were hunted down and eliminated, but the outcome was never in doubt once Imperial reinforcements had broken the siege. The cost of victory proved almost unbearable for the Crimson Fists. Of the chapter's original 1,000 Space Marines, fewer than 200 had survived the fortress-monastery's destruction and the subsequent fighting. Centuries of accumulated equipment, vehicles, and weapons had been lost, while the destruction of the gene seed storage facilities threatened the chapter's long-term survival. The fortress monastery itself would require complete reconstruction, a process that would take decades, even with Adeptus Mechanicus support. Yet the defense of New Rynn City had also demonstrated the enduring strength of the chapter's traditions and the effectiveness of their training. Pedro Cantor's leadership during the crisis had saved not only the civilian population, but also preserved the core identity that would allow the Crimson Fists to rebuild. The bonds forged between the Space Marines and the people of Rynn's world during the siege created a foundation of mutual respect and loyalty that would sustain both through the difficult years ahead. The reconstruction efforts began immediately after the last Ork had been eliminated from Rynn's world. The surviving Crimson Fists faced the monumental task of rebuilding their chapter from a handful of battle brothers, while simultaneously protecting a planet that remained vulnerable to future attacks. The process would test every aspect of their character and determination, but the successful defense of New Rynn City had proven that the chapter's essential spirit remained unbroken despite the catastrophic losses they had endured. The ascension of Pedro Cantor to the position of chapter master had occurred decades before the catastrophic events that would define his legacy. His rise through the ranks of the Crimson Fists demonstrated the meritocratic principles that governed Space Marine leadership, where tactical acumen, unwavering courage, and dedication to the chapter's traditions determined advancement rather than political maneuvering or noble birth. Cantor's early career as a battle brother in the 4th Company had distinguished him during numerous campaigns against Ork raiders and chaos cultist uprisings throughout the Loki sector, where his ability to adapt Imperial Fists' siege warfare doctrines to diverse tactical situations caught the attention of his superiors. His promotion to sergeant came after a particularly brutal engagement against Dark Eldar raiders, who had been terrorizing Imperial shipping lanes near the Badab sector. Cantor's tactical squad had been tasked with clearing a captured merchant vessel of Xeno's pirates, a mission that required the precise room-to-room fighting techniques inherited from the chapter's Imperial Fists gene seed. The young Space Marine's ability to coordinate his squads advanced through the ship's cramped corridors while maintaining communication with supporting elements demonstrated the kind of battlefield leadership that marked future commanders. The transition from sergeant to company captain required Cantor to master not only small unit tactics, but also the complex logistics and strategic planning necessary for larger operations. His appointment as captain of the 4th Company came during a period when the Crimson Fists were facing increased pressure from multiple Xenos threats along their operational boundaries. The role demanded someone who could think beyond individual engagements to consider how company-level operations fit within broader chapter objectives and Imperial strategic requirements. Cantor's tactical philosophy during his time as company captain reflected a careful balance between the defensive expertise inherited from Rogel Dorn's gene seed and the aggressive flexibility required by the Crimson Fist's position on the Imperial frontier. Unlike some Imperial Fist successors who focused exclusively on static defensive operations, Cantor understood that protecting Rynn's world and the surrounding systems often required preemptive strikes against gathering threats. His company developed a reputation for rapid deployment operations that eliminated enemy forces before they could establish secure positions or threaten Imperial civilians. The selection process that elevated Cantor to chapter master involved extensive consultation among the chapter's senior leadership, including the Master of Sanctity, Chief Librarian, and the various company captains. The position required someone who could maintain the chapter's fighting effectiveness while navigating the complex political relationships that governed interactions with other Imperial institutions. Cantor's demonstrated ability to work effectively with Imperial Guard commanders, naval officers, and Adeptus Mechanicus representatives made him an ideal candidate for the broader responsibilities of chapter leadership. His assumption of the chapter master's role brought immediate challenges as the security situation throughout the Loki sector continued to deteriorate. Increased Ork activity along the frontier regions suggested that major Waaagh formations were gathering strength beyond Imperial observation capabilities. Cantor responded by implementing enhanced patrol schedules and establishing forward observation posts that could provide early warning of large-scale Xenos movements. These preparations, while ultimately insufficient to prevent the disaster that would befall the chapter, demonstrated his understanding of the strategic threats facing Rynn's world. The master-crafted storm bolter known as Dorn's Arrow had been wielded by Crimson Fist's chapter masters for over 3 millennia, its origins tracing back to the chapter's founding era, when the first chapter master commissioned the weapon from the finest artificers available to the nascent organization. The storm bolter's construction incorporated rare materials and advanced manufacturing techniques that exceeded standard Astartes weaponry specifications. Its twin-linked barrels had been crafted from adamantium alloys that could withstand the stress of sustained rapid fire, while the weapon's internal mechanisms included precision-engineered components that enhanced both accuracy and reliability. The weapon's machine spirit had been consecrated through ancient rituals performed by the chapter's tech marines in cooperation with visiting Adeptus Mechanicus personnel. These ceremonies imbued Dorn's Arrow with a level of responsiveness and tactical awareness that bordered on artificial intelligence, allowing the weapon to adjust its firing patterns automatically to maximize effectiveness against different target types. The Storm Bolter could switch between standard mass reactive rounds for anti-personnel work and specialized ammunition types designed to penetrate heavy armor or disrupt electronic systems. Cantor's mastery of Dorn's Arrow reflected years of intensive training and practice that began long before his elevation to chapter master. The weapon's weight and balance differed significantly from standard Astartes armaments, requiring specialized techniques for effective employment in close-quarters combat situations. The Storm Bolter's rapid rate of fire demanded precise ammunition management and careful attention to barrel temperature to prevent overheating during extended engagements. Cantor's ability to employ the weapon effectively while simultaneously commanding tactical operations demonstrated the kind of multitasking capability that distinguished exceptional Space Marine leaders. The chapter masters tactical brilliance in urban warfare environments, drew directly from the defensive expertise encoded within his Imperial Fists gene seed, while incorporating lessons learned from decades of combat experience on Rynn's world and throughout the Loki sector. His understanding of how urban terrain could be manipulated to favor defending forces had been honed through countless training exercises in the ruins of ancient cities scattered across the chapter's homeworld. These practice sessions taught him to recognize how civilian infrastructure could be converted into defensive positions and how city layouts could be used to channel enemy advances into predetermined killing zones. Cantor's approach to urban combat emphasized the importance of maintaining multiple fallback positions and establishing overlapping fields of fire that could cover withdrawal routes when tactical situations demanded strategic repositioning. His tactical doctrine recognized that urban warfare often required defenders to trade space for time, using the complex three-dimensional environment of city fighting to inflict maximum casualties on attackers while preserving friendly forces for continued resistance. This philosophy would prove crucial during the siege of New Rynn City, where his ability to maximize the defensive potential of civilian architecture helped sustain resistance against overwhelming odds. The integration of PDF forces and civilian volunteers into defensive operations represented another aspect of Cantor's tactical expertise that distinguished him from many Space Marine commanders who preferred to operate independently of non-Astartes personnel. His experience working with Rynn's world's feudal military traditions had taught him how to effectively employ conventional forces in supporting roles that enhanced overall defensive capabilities without exposing them unnecessarily to dangers they were not equipped to handle. This understanding proved invaluable when the chapter's reduced numbers made cooperation with local forces essential for survival. The catastrophic destruction of the fortress-monastery and the devastating casualties inflicted on the chapter created leadership challenges that few Space Marine commanders had ever faced. Cantor found himself responsible for rebuilding not just the physical infrastructure necessary for chapter operations, but also the complex organizational culture that had developed over millennia of continuous service. The loss of so many veteran sergeants and specialists meant that institutional knowledge accumulated over centuries had been eliminated in a single catastrophic moment. The burden of reconstruction extended far beyond simple recruitment and training of new battle brothers. The chapter's gene seed stocks, carefully maintained and expanded over thousands of years, had been almost entirely destroyed in the fortress-monastery's explosion. Without adequate genetic material for creating new Space Marines, the Crimson Fists faced the possibility of slow extinction as attrition gradually reduced their numbers below sustainable levels. Cantor's efforts to locate and recover any surviving gene seed samples became a desperate race against time that required coordination with Adeptus Mechanicus Biologus specialists and other Space Marine chapters willing to provide technical assistance. The process of rebuilding the chapter's strength from fewer than 200 surviving Astartes to full operational capacity would require decades of careful planning and resource management. Each new recruit represented a significant investment of time, equipment, and expertise that the reduced chapter could barely afford. The traditional selection processes that had served the Crimson Fists for millennia needed modification to account for the urgent need for new battle brothers, while maintaining the quality standards essential for Space Marine effectiveness. Cantor's leadership during this reconstruction period demonstrated his understanding that the chapter's survival depended not only on military effectiveness, but also on maintaining the cultural traditions and spiritual identity that distinguished the Crimson Fists from other Space Marine organizations. The loss of the Reclusiam and its sacred artifacts had eliminated many of the physical symbols that connected current battle brothers to their chapter's history. Rebuilding these connections required careful attention to ceremony, tradition, and the preservation of oral histories that had survived the disaster. The relationship between Pedro Cantor and Captain Alessio Cortez exemplified the complex dynamics that governed leadership within the reconstructed chapter. Cortez had earned his reputation as one of the Crimson Fist's most aggressive and effective company commanders through decades of successful operations against Xeno's threats throughout the Loki sector. His tactical approach emphasized rapid assault operations and close-quarters combat techniques that maximized the shock value of space marine intervention in conventional conflicts. Cortez's survival of the fortress-monastery disaster had been largely due to his company's deployment on a training exercise in Rynn's world's northern wilderness when the catastrophic explosion occurred. This fortunate positioning allowed his forces to avoid the immediate casualties that devastated other units, but it also meant that Cortez witnessed the destruction of his chapter's home base from a distance that prevented any possibility of immediate assistance. The psychological impact of watching centuries of tradition and brotherhood disappear in a single moment of destruction created lasting effects that influenced his subsequent tactical decisions and leadership style. The dynamic between Cantor's measured, strategic approach to chapter reconstruction and Cortez's more aggressive, action-oriented philosophy created productive tension within the senior command structure. Cortez's eagerness to engage enemies directly and decisively provided a necessary counterbalance to the careful, methodical planning required for long-term rebuilding efforts. His company's aggressive patrol operations and rapid response capabilities helped maintain the chapter's reputation for effective intervention, while Cantor focused on the complex administrative and logistical challenges of reconstruction. The senior command structure that emerged from the disaster required significant reorganization, as traditional company hierarchies had been disrupted by the massive casualties suffered during the fortress-monastery's destruction. Many veteran sergeants and specialists who would normally have provided continuity during leadership transitions had been killed in the explosion, creating gaps in institutional knowledge that threatened operational effectiveness. Cantor's efforts to reconstruct functional command relationships involved promoting surviving battle brothers to positions of greater responsibility, while providing intensive training to compensate for their limited experience in senior roles. The chapter's chaplains, those who had survived, played crucial roles in maintaining morale and spiritual cohesion during the difficult reconstruction period. The loss of sacred relics and ceremonial artifacts had created a spiritual vacuum that threatened to undermine the religious devotion essential for Space Marine effectiveness. The surviving chaplains worked closely with Cantor to establish new traditions and ceremonies that could provide psychological continuity with the chapter's pre-disaster identity while acknowledging the fundamental changes that had occurred. The integration of new recruits into the drastically reduced chapter required modifications to traditional training protocols that had been developed for organizations operating at full strength. The shortage of experienced veterans meant that newly inducted battle brothers received less individual attention and mentorship than had been standard practice throughout the chapter's history. Cantor's response involved creating modified training programs that compressed essential instruction while maintaining the quality standards necessary for Space Marine effectiveness. The reconstruction of the chapter's fleet capabilities represented another major challenge that required careful coordination with Imperial Navy authorities and Adeptus Mechanicus shipyards. Many of the chapter's vessels had been destroyed or severely damaged during the space battles preceding the fortress-monastery disaster, leaving the surviving Crimson Fists with inadequate transportation and fire support capabilities. The process of acquiring replacement ships involved complex negotiations with imperial bureaucracies that were often reluctant to allocate scarce resources to a chapter whose survival remained uncertain. Cantor's leadership during this period of reconstruction demonstrated his ability to balance immediate tactical requirements with long-term strategic planning necessary for chapter survival. His decisions regarding resource allocation, personnel assignments, and operational priorities required careful consideration of how each choice would affect the chapter's future capabilities while maintaining current effectiveness against ongoing threats. The success of these efforts would ultimately determine whether the Crimson Fists could rebuild their strength and continue their service to the Imperium or gradually fade into extinction through attrition and resource depletion. The feudal structure that governed Rynn's world had evolved over millennia into a complex web of noble houses, military orders, and territorial kingdoms that provided the Crimson Fists with an ideal recruitment pool while maintaining the planet's stability and productivity. The world's political organization centered around dozens of independent duchies and baronies, each controlling specific geographic regions that ranged from fertile agricultural valleys to mineral-rich mountain territories. These feudal domains operated under ancient codes of chivalry and honor that emphasized martial prowess, personal loyalty, and service to one's superiors, creating a culture that naturally aligned with Space Marine values and traditions. The noble houses of Rynn's world traced their lineages back to the original colonists who had settled the planet during the early expansion phases of human civilization. These founding families had established their authority through military conquest and successful defense of their territories against both Xenos incursions and rival human factions. Over the centuries, their bloodlines had been refined through selective marriage alliances and the constant pressure of warfare, producing generations of leaders who combined tactical intelligence with the physical courage necessary for personal combat leadership. Each major noble house maintained its own military forces, typically organized around a corps of professional knights supported by larger numbers of men at arms and militia troops drawn from the local population. These private armies served multiple functions within the feudal system, providing defense against external threats while also enforcing the nobles' authority within their domain. The constant low-level warfare between rival houses ensured that military skills remained sharp and that young warriors had regular opportunities to prove their worth in actual combat rather than mere training exercises. The arrival of the Crimson Fists had fundamentally altered this feudal landscape without destroying its essential character. Rather than imposing direct rule over the planet's population, the Space Marines had positioned themselves as the ultimate feudal overlords, accepting the homage and service of the existing noble houses while allowing them to maintain their traditional authority structures. This arrangement provided the chapter with administrative efficiency and local expertise, while preserving the cultural traditions that made Rynn's world such an effective recruiting ground. The relationship between the Crimson Fists and the planetary nobility operated through a carefully structured hierarchy of mutual obligations and benefits. The noble houses provided tribute in the form of raw materials, manufactured goods, and potential recruits, while the Space Marines offered protection against external threats that exceeded local military capabilities. This exchange created a symbiotic relationship where both parties benefited from cooperation while maintaining their distinct roles within the broader Imperial system. The Rynnite Guard represented the elite military formation that served as the primary link between the feudal nobility and the Crimson Fists' operational requirements. This organization drew its membership from the younger sons of noble families and the most promising warriors from the various house militaries, creating a professional force that combined the best aspects of feudal military tradition with modern Imperial Guard training and equipment. The Guard's regiments were organized according to Codex Astartes principles, allowing them to operate effectively alongside Space Marine forces when circumstances required joint operations. Recruitment into the Rynnite Guard required candidates to demonstrate not only exceptional fighting ability, but also the leadership qualities and tactical understanding necessary for independent command responsibilities. The selection process involved extensive testing of both physical capabilities and mental resilience, as Guard officers needed to function effectively in situations where Space Marine support might not be immediately available. This rigorous screening ensured that the Guard maintained high standards while providing the Crimson Fists with reliable allies who understood both local conditions and Imperial military doctrine. The Guard's equipment reflected their intermediate position between feudal house militaries and full Imperial Guard regiments. Their weapons included modern Law's weapons and solid projectile firearms manufactured in Rynn's world's industrial centers, while their armor combined traditional protective elements with advanced materials provided through the chapter's connections to the Adeptus Mechanicus. This hybrid approach created forces that were more effective than typical PDF units, while remaining affordable enough for sustained operations across the planet's diverse terrain. The training regimens followed by Rynnite Guard units incorporated lessons learned from centuries of cooperation with the Crimson Fists, emphasizing the urban warfare techniques and defensive operations that had proven most effective during the chapter's various campaigns. Guard officers studied detailed tactical analyses of past engagements, learning how conventional forces could best support Space Marine operations while maintaining their own effectiveness against threats that did not require Astartes' intervention. This education created a cadre of professional soldiers who understood both the capabilities and limitations of different military approaches. The wilderness regions of Rynn's world provided the harsh testing grounds where potential Space Marine recruits underwent the traditional trials that determined their suitability for transformation into Astartes warriors. These vast areas of untamed forest, rocky badlands, and treacherous mountain ranges had been deliberately preserved in their natural state to serve as permanent training environments where young candidates could face genuine dangers without the artificial constraints of constructed obstacle courses or simulated combat scenarios. The hunting traditions practiced by Rynn's world's noble families served dual purposes within the chapter's recruitment system, providing both recreational activities for the planetary elite and practical training for potential recruits. These hunts targeted dangerous predators that inhabited the planet's wilderness areas, creatures whose speed, strength, and cunning presented legitimate threats even to well-armed and experienced hunters. The skills required for successful hunting, including tracking, stealth, marksmanship, and the ability to remain calm under pressure, translated directly to military applications that the Crimson Fists valued in their battle brothers. The most prestigious hunts focused on apex predators that had evolved specifically to exploit Rynn's world's diverse ecological niches. Razor cats, massive felines whose natural camouflage and lightning-fast reflexes made them nearly impossible to detect until they attacked, required hunters to develop exceptional awareness and quick reaction times. Pack-hunting dire wolves that coordinated their attacks with near-human intelligence forced hunting parties to work together effectively while maintaining individual alertness for sudden threats from unexpected directions. The mountain regions harbored creatures that tested different aspects of potential recruits' capabilities, including massive rock bears, whose thick hides could turn aside all but the most precisely placed shots, and whose territorial nature made them extremely aggressive when encountered in their preferred cave environments. Hunting these beasts required not only physical courage, but also the tactical planning necessary to approach dangerous prey in terrain that favored the defender. Young nobles who successfully brought down such creatures demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and personal bravery that marked potential Space Marine candidates. The formal trials that determined final selection for Space Marine transformation combined elements of these traditional hunts with specific tests designed to evaluate the psychological and physical characteristics essential for successful gene seed implantation. Candidates underwent extended periods of survival training in the wilderness, where they had to locate food and water while avoiding or defeating the various predators that inhabited these regions. These exercises tested not only basic survival skills, but also the mental resilience necessary to function effectively when isolated from support and facing constant danger. The trial known as the Long Hunt required candidates to track and kill a specific target creature using only basic equipment and their own skills, with no assistance from guides or advanced technology. This test typically lasted several weeks and took place in some of the planet's most challenging terrain, where environmental hazards posed threats equal to those presented by dangerous wildlife. Successful completion required candidates to demonstrate sustained physical endurance, tactical flexibility, and the kind of determined persistence that characterized effective Space Marines. The psychological evaluation conducted during these trials focused on identifying candidates who possess the mental characteristics necessary for transformation into superhuman warriors while retaining their essential humanity. The chapter's chaplains and apothecaries observed how potential recruits responded to extreme stress, isolation, and the constant threat of death, looking for individuals who could maintain rational decision-making capabilities under conditions that would break ordinary humans. These observations helped identify candidates who possessed the rare combination of aggression and self-control that allowed Space Marines to function effectively in combat while adhering to the moral standards expected of the Emperor's chosen warriors. The cultural impact of the Crimson Fist's presence on Rynn's world extended far beyond simple military protection, fundamentally shaping the planet's development in ways that influenced everything from technological advancement to artistic expression. The chapter's arrival had introduced advanced manufacturing techniques and scientific knowledge that gradually filtered down through the feudal hierarchy, improving agricultural productivity, medical care, and industrial capacity throughout the settled regions. These improvements occurred slowly and selectively, as the Space Marines carefully balanced the benefits of technological advancement against the need to preserve the cultural traditions that made the planet such an effective recruiting ground. The fortress-monastery's construction had required massive engineering projects that employed thousands of local workers and introduced them to construction techniques and materials far beyond anything previously available on Rynn's world. The knowledge gained through participation in these projects spread throughout the planet's artisan communities, leading to improvements in civilian architecture and infrastructure that enhanced the quality of life for ordinary citizens. The defensive walls and fortifications built around major settlements incorporated design principles derived from Space Marine military engineering, creating strongholds that could withstand attacks by conventional forces while maintaining the aesthetic elements that reflected local architectural traditions. The chapter's Tech Marines worked closely with local craftsmen and engineers to establish manufacturing facilities capable of producing equipment and supplies needed for ongoing operations. These workshops introduced precision manufacturing techniques and quality control standards that gradually raised the overall level of technological sophistication available throughout the planet's industrial centers. The improvements in metallurgy, electronics, and mechanical engineering that resulted from this cooperation benefited both military and civilian applications, creating a more robust economic base that could support larger populations and more complex social structures. The educational systems that developed under Space Marine influence reflected the chapter's understanding that effective recruitment required a population capable of producing candidates with the intellectual capabilities necessary for transformation into Astartes warriors. The traditional feudal emphasis on martial training expanded to include instruction in mathematics, engineering, and tactical theory that prepared young nobles for potential service in either the Rynnite Guard or as Space Marine recruits. These educational improvements created a more sophisticated leadership class that could manage the increasingly complex administrative and logistical requirements of governing an advanced Imperial world. The artistic and cultural traditions of Rynn's world evolved to incorporate themes and symbols derived from the chapter's presence and history. Local craftsmen created weapons, armor, and decorative items that reflected Space Marine aesthetic principles while maintaining connection to traditional feudal design elements. The heraldic traditions practiced by the noble houses expanded to include references to famous battles and heroic actions performed by both the Crimson Fists and local military forces, creating a shared cultural narrative that reinforced the bonds between the Space Marines and their human subjects. The religious practices followed by Rynn's world's population gradually incorporated elements of the imperial cult that emphasized the emperor's role as humanity's protector and the Space Marines' position as his chosen warriors. Local shrines and temples featured artwork depicting the Primarchs and famous Space Marine heroes alongside traditional religious figures, creating a syncretic belief system that honored both ancient traditions and imperial doctrine. These religious developments helped integrate the planet more fully into the broader imperial cultural framework, while preserving the spiritual elements that contributed to the population's military effectiveness. The economic development that occurred under Crimson Fist's protection transformed Rynn's world from a relatively primitive feudal society into a prosperous imperial world capable of supporting significant military and industrial operations. The chapter's protection against external threats allowed trade relationships to develop with other imperial worlds, bringing new technologies, resources, and cultural influences that enriched local society. The stability provided by Space Marine governance encouraged long-term investment in infrastructure projects and industrial development that would have been impossible under the constant warfare that had characterized the planet's pre-imperial history. The genetic heritage flowing through every Crimson Fist's enhanced physiology traces its origins directly to Rogal Dorn, the stoic Primarch of the 7th Legion who stood as one of the Emperor's most trusted sons during humanity's greatest trials. This biological connection extends far beyond mere genetic compatibility, embedding within each battle brother the fundamental characteristics that define Dorn himself and shaped the Imperial Fists Legion throughout the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. The gene seed represents more than simple biological material. It carries encoded behavioral patterns, psychological predispositions, and physical capabilities that have been refined over 10 millennia of careful cultivation and selection. The process of gene seed implantation begins with the careful extraction of genetic material from fallen battle brothers, a sacred duty performed by the chapter's apothecaries under conditions of absolute sterility and ritual purity. Each progenitor gland harvested from a deceased Space Marine contains the accumulated genetic information necessary to create new organs for implantation into worthy candidates. This biological inheritance includes not only the physical modifications that transform ordinary humans into superhuman warriors, but also the subtle neurological changes that influence thought patterns, emotional responses, and instinctive reactions to combat situations. The Crimson Fists share their genetic foundation with several other successor chapters created during the Second Founding, including the Black Templars, whose zealous crusading nature represents one extreme interpretation of Dorn's legacy, and the more traditionally organized chapters like the Excoriators and Soul Drinkers. Each of these organizations developed distinct cultural identities while maintaining the core genetic characteristics inherited from their common Primarch. The variations in their tactical doctrines, recruitment practices, and organizational structures demonstrate how environmental factors and leadership decisions can shape the expression of shared genetic traits. The psychological inheritance derived from Dorn's gene seed manifests most clearly in the unwavering stubbornness that characterizes Crimson Fist's battle brothers when facing overwhelming odds. This trait, which some observers might interpret as mere obstinacy, actually represents a refined form of tactical determination that allows Space Marines to continue fighting effectively even when conventional military logic would suggest retreat or surrender. During the siege of New Rynn City, this genetic predisposition enabled the surviving Crimson Fists to maintain organized resistance against Ork forces that outnumbered them by ratios that would have broken the morale of ordinary soldiers. The defensive expertise encoded within Dorn's genetic legacy expresses itself through an intuitive understanding of fortification principles, urban warfare tactics, and siegecraft that requires no formal instruction to manifest. Crimson Fist's battle brothers instinctively recognize how terrain features can be exploited for defensive advantage, how civilian structures can be converted into strongpoints, and how limited forces can be positioned to maximize their effectiveness against superior numbers. This knowledge appears to emerge naturally from their enhanced neural structures rather than being learned through traditional training methods. The loyalty that defines the Crimson Fists extends beyond simple obedience to orders or adherence to imperial doctrine, representing instead a profound emotional commitment to protecting humanity that influences every aspect of their behavior. This characteristic, inherited directly from Rogel Dorn's own unwavering dedication to the Emperor, creates bonds between battle brothers that transcend normal military relationships. The genetic basis for this loyalty helps explain why the chapter maintained its cohesion and fighting effectiveness even after suffering catastrophic losses during the fortress-monastery disaster. The absence of two specific organs within the Crimson Fist's enhanced physiology reflects genetic deficiencies that have affected all Imperial Fist successors since their parent legion's founding. The Becher's gland, which would normally allow Space Marines to produce corrosive saliva capable of dissolving metal and neutralizing toxins, simply fails to develop properly during the implantation process. This missing capability requires the chapter to rely more heavily on conventional equipment for tasks that other Space Marines might accomplish through biological means, such as breaching locked doors or surviving exposure to certain chemical weapons. The Susan membrane, sometimes called the hibernator, represents another absent organ that would normally allow Space Marines to enter extended periods of suspended animation when facing extreme environmental conditions or when medical treatment is unavailable. Without this capability, Crimson Fist's battle brothers cannot survive the kind of extended hibernation that might allow them to endure multi-year space voyages in damaged vessels or remain viable while buried under rubble for extended periods. This deficiency requires the chapter to maintain more sophisticated medical facilities and evacuation procedures than chapters whose gene seed includes functional sus and membranes. These genetic limitations have shaped the chapter's tactical doctrines and operational procedures in subtle but significant ways. The absence of the Becher's gland has encouraged greater emphasis on engineering solutions and specialized equipment for tasks requiring chemical or metallurgical capabilities. Crimson Fist's Tech Marines have developed particularly sophisticated techniques for rapid fortification, construction, and demolitions work to compensate for their battle brothers' inability to produce corrosive substances naturally. The chapter's armories include larger stocks of acid compounds, cutting tools, and specialized breaching charges than might be found in chapters with fully functional gene seed. The missing Susan membrane has influenced the chapter's approach to space travel, medical treatment, and emergency procedures. Crimson Fist's vessels carry more extensive medical facilities and larger apothecary staffs than chapters whose battle brothers can rely on biological hibernation during extended voyages or medical emergencies. The chapter's protocols for dealing with critically wounded battle brothers emphasize rapid evacuation and immediate treatment, rather than the extended suspended animation that might be employed by chapters with functional hibernation capabilities. The sacred responsibility of maintaining gene seed purity falls primarily to the chapter's apothecaries, who serve as both medical practitioners and guardians of the genetic heritage that defines the Crimson Fist's identity. These specialized Space Marines undergo decades of additional training beyond the standard Astartes enhancement process, learning the complex biological and biochemical processes that govern gene seed development, storage, and implantation. Their expertise encompasses not only the medical knowledge necessary for treating wounded battle brothers, but also the genetic engineering principles required to identify and eliminate potential mutations that could compromise the chapter's genetic integrity. The apothecarian within the fortress-monastery housed sophisticated laboratory equipment capable of analyzing gene seed samples at the molecular level, identifying potential genetic drift, and maintaining the sterile conditions necessary for long-term storage of progenitor glands. The facility's destruction during the catastrophic explosion eliminated not only the physical infrastructure necessary for gene seed cultivation, but also centuries of accumulated genetic material that represented the chapter's future recruitment potential. The loss of these irreplaceable biological resources created an existential threat to the chapter's survival that extended far beyond the immediate tactical consequences of reduced manpower. The process of gene seed cultivation requires precise environmental controls and careful monitoring throughout the development cycle, from initial extraction to final implantation. Progenitor glands harvested from fallen battle brothers must be processed within specific time limits to maintain their viability, while the storage conditions require exact temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition to prevent degradation. The apothecaries responsible for this work follow ritual procedures that have been refined over millennia, combining scientific precision with religious devotion to ensure that each step in the process maintains the genetic purity essential for successful implantation. The testing protocols employed to verify gene seed quality involve comprehensive genetic analysis that can identify even minor deviations from the established template derived from Rogal Dorn's original genetic structure. These examinations check for mutations that might affect organ development, psychological stability, or physical capabilities, ensuring that only the highest quality genetic material is used for creating new battle brothers. The standards maintained by the Crimson Fists apothecaries have historically exceeded even the stringent requirements established by the Adeptus Mechanicus for gene seed purity verification. The reconstruction of the chapter's genetic capabilities following the fortress-monastery disaster required extensive cooperation with other Imperial Fists, successor chapters, and specialized Adeptus Mechanicus facilities capable of providing the technical expertise and equipment necessary for rebuilding the apothecarian. The process involved not only constructing new laboratory facilities, but also establishing relationships with other chapters willing to share genetic material and technical knowledge that could help restore the Crimson Fists' recruitment capabilities. These negotiations required careful diplomatic work to convince other Space Marine organizations to provide assistance that might compromise their own genetic security. The psychological traits inherited from Rogal Dorn's gene seed manifest differently in various successor chapters, but the Crimson Fists have developed particularly pronounced expressions of certain characteristics that reflect their specific history and cultural development. The stubbornness that defines their tactical approach extends beyond simple battlefield determination to influence their approach to problem-solving, long-term planning, and interpersonal relationships within the chapter hierarchy. This trait has enabled them to maintain their identity and operational effectiveness through periods of extreme adversity, while occasionally creating friction with Imperial authorities who prefer more flexible or accommodating military partners. The defensive expertise encoded within their genetic heritage expresses itself through an almost supernatural ability to assess terrain for its defensive potential, and to identify the optimal positioning of forces to maximize their effectiveness against superior numbers. This capability extends beyond conscious tactical analysis to include subconscious pattern recognition that allows Crimson Fist's battle brothers to identify potential ambush sites, recognize structural weaknesses in enemy fortifications, and anticipate the most likely avenues of approach that attacking forces will employ. The genetic basis for these abilities helps explain why the chapter has historically excelled in siege warfare and urban combat operations. The loyalty that characterizes all Imperial Fists successors takes on particular intensity within the Crimson Fists, manifesting as an emotional commitment to protecting Imperial citizens that goes beyond simple duty or obedience to orders. This genetic predisposition creates powerful bonds between battle brothers and the human populations they defend, leading to tactical decisions that prioritize civilian protection even when such choices might compromise military objectives. The strength of this loyalty has historically enabled the chapter to maintain high morale and unit cohesion even during extended campaigns where other Space Marine organizations might experience psychological strain. The interaction between genetic predisposition and cultural development within the chapter creates feedback loops that reinforce certain behavioral patterns while suppressing others. The feudal traditions of Rynn's world, with their emphasis on personal honor and loyalty to one's superiors, align closely with the psychological traits encoded within Dorn's gene seed, creating a cultural environment that enhances the expression of desirable characteristics while providing social structures that channel potentially problematic traits in productive directions. The result is a chapter culture that maximizes the benefits of their genetic heritage while minimizing potential drawbacks. The process of recruiting new battle brothers from Rynn's world's population involves careful screening not only for physical compatibility with the gene seed implantation process, but also for psychological characteristics that will complement the genetic traits inherited from Rogel Dorn. Candidates who demonstrate excessive flexibility or willingness to compromise under pressure may be rejected despite meeting all other requirements, while those who show appropriate levels of determination and loyalty receive preference, even if their physical capabilities are marginal. This selection process ensures that cultural and genetic factors work together to produce space marines who embody the chapter's ideals. The training regimens employed to develop newly implanted battle brothers emphasize exercises and scenarios that activate and strengthen the genetic predispositions inherited from their primarch. Defensive operations, siege warfare simulations, and urban combat training provide opportunities for recruits to experience the intuitive tactical understanding that emerges from their enhanced neural structures. The chapter's veterans serve as mentors who help new battle brothers recognize and trust these genetically encoded instincts while learning to integrate them with conscious tactical analysis and strategic planning. The tactical doctrines that define the Crimson Fist's approach to warfare represent a carefully evolved synthesis of inherited Imperial Fists methodologies and hard-won battlefield experience accumulated over 10 millennia of continuous combat operations. The chapter's defensive expertise traces its origins directly to the siegecraft mastered by Rogel Dorn's 7th Legion during the Great Crusade and refined through the brutal trials of the Horus Heresy. This foundation provided the Crimson Fists with an intuitive understanding of fortification principles, defensive positioning, and the psychological dynamics that govern siege warfare, knowledge that has been continuously adapted to meet the changing tactical challenges of the 41st millennium. The Imperial Fists Legion's legendary defense of the Imperial Palace during the Siege of Terra established tactical principles that continue to influence their successor chapters thousands of years later. The ability to transform any position into a defensible strongpoint, the coordination of overlapping fields of fire, and the precise timing required for defensive counterattacks became encoded not only in training manuals, but also in the genetic memory carried by Dorn's gene seed. The Crimson Fists inherited these capabilities, along with their Primarch's biological legacy, but their unique operational environment has shaped how these inherited traits manifest in actual combat situations. The chapter's specialization in siege-breaking operations developed as a natural extension of their defensive expertise, applying the same understanding of fortification principles from the opposite perspective. Where defensive warfare requires knowledge of how strongpoints can be held against superior numbers, siege-breaking demands comprehension of how those same positions can be systematically dismantled through coordinated assault operations. The Crimson Fists learn to identify the critical structural and tactical weaknesses that exist in any fortified position, enabling them to focus their limited resources on the most vulnerable points, rather than attempting costly frontal assaults against prepared defenses. The tactical flexibility required for effective siege breaking forced the chapter to develop capabilities that extended well beyond the purely defensive focus traditionally associated with Imperial Fist successors. Assault operations against fortified positions demand precise coordination between different unit types, sophisticated intelligence gathering to identify enemy weak points, and the ability to adapt rapidly when initial assault plans encounter unexpected resistance. These requirements pushed the Crimson Fists to cultivate tactical skills that complemented their defensive expertise while maintaining the fundamental characteristics that define their approach to warfare. The urban warfare expertise that became the chapter's defining tactical specialization emerged from centuries of combat operations in the hive cities and fortress complexes that dominated the strategic landscape of the Loki sector. Unlike the open battlefields where traditional Imperial Guard formations excelled, or the wilderness environments that favored reconnaissance and rapid strike operations, urban combat presented unique challenges that required specialized techniques and equipment. The three-dimensional nature of city fighting, with its multiple levels of engagement and complex sight lines, demanded tactical approaches that differed significantly from conventional military doctrine. The Crimson Fist's mastery of urban warfare developed through practical experience rather than theoretical study, as the chapter faced repeated deployments against enemies who had fortified themselves within civilian population centers. These engagements taught them how to navigate the complex moral and tactical challenges that arose when military objectives had to be achieved, while minimizing civilian casualties and preserving critical infrastructure. The lessons learned during these operations created a body of tactical knowledge that enabled the chapter to operate effectively in urban environments that would have proven problematic for Space Marine organizations trained primarily for open field engagements. The chapter's approach to urban combat emphasized the importance of controlling key terrain features that could dominate surrounding areas while providing secure bases for further operations. High-rise structures, transportation hubs, and communication centers became priority objectives not only for their immediate tactical value, but also for their psychological impact on both enemy forces and civilian populations. The Crimson Fists learned to recognize how the capture or destruction of specific buildings could influence the broader tactical situation by disrupting enemy command structures or demonstrating Imperial control to local inhabitants. The integration of heavy weapons and Devastator squads into the chapter's preferred defensive formations reflected their understanding that urban warfare required firepower capabilities that exceeded the standard armament carried by tactical squads. The confined spaces and reinforced structures typical of city fighting demanded weapons that could penetrate hardened targets while maintaining accuracy in environments where collateral damage posed significant risks. The chapter's Devastator squads specialized in employing las cannons, missile launchers, and plasma cannons in urban environments where their maximum effective range might be measured in city blocks rather than kilometers. The tactical deployment of heavy weapons teams within urban defensive positions required careful consideration of sight lines, structural support, and withdrawal routes that differed significantly from conventional battlefield applications. Buildings that appeared ideal for heavy weapon emplacements might lack the structural integrity to support sustained firing, while positions that offered excellent fields of fire could become death traps if enemy forces managed to outflank the defensive line. The Crimson Fists developed specialized techniques for rapidly assessing urban terrain to identify positions that combined tactical effectiveness with reasonable survivability for the weapons crews. The chapter's adherence to Codex Astartes' organizational principles provided a stable foundation for their tactical innovations, while ensuring compatibility with other Imperial military forces during joint operations. The standard company structure of 100 battle brothers organized into tactical, assault, and Devastator squads offered sufficient flexibility to handle most combat situations, while maintaining the unit cohesion essential for Space Marine effectiveness. However, the Crimson Fists recognized that strict adherence to Codex doctrine, without regard for local conditions, could prove counterproductive in the unique tactical environments where they operated most frequently. The balance between Codex compliance and practical adaptation became a defining characteristic of the chapter's command philosophy, as senior officers learned to interpret standard doctrine through the lens of their specific operational requirements. The Codex Astartes provided proven tactical frameworks that had been tested across thousands of battlefields throughout the galaxy, but its general principles required modification to address the particular challenges posed by urban warfare and siege operations. The chapter's leadership developed the ability to maintain doctrinal compliance in spirit while adapting specific tactical procedures to maximize effectiveness in their preferred combat environments. The process of tactical adaptation involved extensive analysis of combat performance data collected during actual engagements, allowing the chapter's leadership to identify patterns and develop improved procedures based on empirical evidence rather than theoretical speculation. After action, reports from company commanders provided detailed information about which tactical approaches had proven effective and which had resulted in unnecessary casualties or mission failures. This systematic approach to tactical development enabled the Crimson Fists to refine their combat doctrines continuously while maintaining the fundamental organizational structure mandated by the Codex Astartes. The integration of specialized equipment and modified tactical procedures created a distinctive combat style that maximized the chapter's effectiveness in urban environments while preserving their capability to operate in other tactical situations when circumstances required. The emphasis on heavy weapons and defensive positioning did not prevent the Crimson Fists from conducting successful assault operations or rapid deployment missions, but it did influence how they approached such engagements. Even during offensive operations, the chapter's battle brothers instinctively sought to establish secure positions that could serve as rallying points or fallback positions if the tactical situation deteriorated. The chapter's preference for defensive operations influenced their approach to equipment selection and logistics planning in ways that distinguished them from Space Marine organizations that emphasized rapid assault tactics or extended reconnaissance missions. The Crimson Fists maintained larger stocks of ammunition for sustained firefights, carried more sophisticated communications equipment to coordinate defensive positions, and invested heavily in engineering tools that could rapidly improve the defensive value of occupied positions. These logistical choices reflected their understanding that successful defensive operations often depended on preparation and resource management rather than individual heroics or tactical brilliance. The psychological aspects of defensive warfare received particular attention within the chapter's tactical doctrine, as the leadership recognized that maintaining morale during extended sieges required different approaches than sustaining fighting spirit during rapid offensive operations. Defensive engagements could last for weeks or months, testing the mental resilience of even enhanced Space Marine physiology through constant vigilance, limited mobility, and the psychological pressure of facing superior enemy numbers. The chapter developed specific training regimens and rotation schedules designed to maintain combat effectiveness throughout extended defensive operations. The urban warfare techniques developed by the Crimson Fists emphasized the importance of understanding civilian population dynamics and the ways in which non-combatant behavior could influence tactical situations. Unlike wilderness or void combat, where civilian presence was minimal or non-existent, urban operations required constant awareness of how military actions might affect local populations and how civilian reactions could impact mission success. The chapter's battle brothers learned to recognize signs of civilian panic or resistance that might indicate enemy infiltration or propaganda efforts designed to undermine Imperial authority. The tactical coordination required for effective urban combat involved communication and command procedures that differed significantly from those employed in conventional battlefield environments. The complex terrain and limited sight lines typical of city fighting made traditional visual signals impractical, while the presence of civilian communications infrastructure created both opportunities and vulnerabilities for military communications systems. The Crimson Fists developed specialized protocols for maintaining unit cohesion and command authority in environments where normal communication methods might be disrupted or compromised. The chapter's Devastator squads received specialized training in urban target identification and engagement techniques that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing the risk of collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. The precision required for urban heavy weapons employment exceeded that needed for battlefield applications, as targets might be located within meters of critical civilian facilities or friendly forces. The Devastator specialists learned to employ their weapons with surgical precision, using advanced targeting systems and specialized ammunition types that could achieve tactical objectives without causing unnecessary destruction to surrounding areas. The integration of assault squads into urban defensive operations required tactical innovations that differed from both traditional Imperial Fists defensive doctrine and standard Codex Astartes assault procedures. Urban environments provided numerous opportunities for close-quarters combat as enemy forces attempted to infiltrate defensive positions through buildings, sewers, or maintenance tunnels. The chapter's assault specialists developed techniques for rapid response to breaches in the defensive perimeter while maintaining the overall integrity of the defensive line, creating a flexible system that could adapt to changing tactical conditions without abandoning established positions. The chapter's approach to siege-breaking operations incorporated lessons learned from their extensive experience in urban defensive warfare, applying their understanding of how fortified positions could be held to the problem of how they could be taken. The same knowledge of structural engineering that enabled them to strengthen defensive positions could be applied in reverse to identify the most efficient methods for destroying enemy fortifications. This dual perspective provided the Crimson Fists with tactical advantages that were not available to Space Marine chapters that specialized exclusively in either offensive or defensive operations. The development of combined arms tactics that integrated heavy weapons teams with assault and tactical squads created flexible combat formations capable of adapting to the rapid changes in tactical situation that characterized urban warfare. These combined formations could establish defensive positions when circumstances favored such tactics, conduct assault operations against enemy strongpoints when offensive action was required, or transition between defensive and offensive postures as the tactical situation evolved. The ability to maintain tactical flexibility while preserving unit cohesion became a hallmark of Crimson Fist's combat effectiveness. The chapter's tactical philosophy recognized that successful urban warfare required not only military expertise, but also understanding of the political and social dynamics that influenced civilian behavior during combat operations. The presence of non-combatants created moral obligations that went beyond simple tactical considerations, as the chapter's actions would be judged not only by their military effectiveness, but also by their impact on Imperial citizens caught in combat zones. This understanding influenced tactical decision-making at all levels, from individual battle brother actions to company-level operational planning. The original fortress-monastery that crowned the mountain peaks of Rynn's world represented one of the most architecturally impressive Space Marine strongholds ever constructed within the Loki sector. Built during the early centuries following the chapter's establishment, the massive complex had been designed to serve multiple functions simultaneously: an impregnable military headquarters, a sacred repository for the chapter's most precious artifacts, and a symbol of imperial authority that could be seen from settlements hundreds of kilometers away. The structure's design incorporated both practical defensive considerations and the ceremonial requirements necessary for a Space Marine chapter's spiritual and administrative functions. The fortress monastery's outer walls rose directly from the living rock of 3 interconnected mountain peaks, creating the impression that the structure had grown organically from the stone itself. These walls, constructed from reinforced ceramite and adamantium plates bonded to the underlying granite, reached heights of over 200 meters in some sections, while maintaining thickness that could withstand direct hits from orbital bombardment weapons. The integration of defensive systems with natural terrain features created overlapping fields of fire that could engage targets approaching from any direction, while providing mutual support between different weapon emplacements. The main gate complex featured massive blast doors capable of sealing the fortress against chemical or biological attacks while maintaining access for authorized personnel and vehicles. These doors, each weighing several hundred tons, operated through sophisticated mechanical systems that could function even if the fortress's main power systems were compromised. The gate's defensive systems included automated weapon turrets, sensor arrays capable of detecting approaching threats at extreme ranges, and void shield generators that could deflect incoming projectiles or energy weapons. Within the fortress monastery's walls, a complex network of corridors, chambers, and defensive positions had been carved from the solid rock over centuries of continuous construction and expansion. The chapter's armories occupied vast underground chambers that could store weapons and equipment sufficient for sustained operations by multiple companies simultaneously. These storage areas maintained precise environmental controls to prevent degradation of sensitive equipment while providing rapid access during emergency deployments. The armory's organization followed strict protocols that ensured weapons could be distributed efficiently while maintaining accountability for every piece of equipment. The vehicle bays housed the chapter's collection of tanks, transports, and specialized vehicles in cavernous spaces that could accommodate everything from individual Rhino personnel carriers to the massive Land Raider battle tanks that served as mobile command centers during major operations. These facilities included maintenance workshops equipped with sophisticated tools and spare parts necessary for keeping the chapter's vehicles operational despite the harsh conditions encountered during combat deployments. The tech marines responsible for vehicle maintenance had established comprehensive maintenance schedules that ensured every piece of equipment remained ready for immediate deployment. The fortress monastery's command center occupied a position near the structure's highest point, providing commanding views of the surrounding terrain while maintaining secure communications with Imperial authorities throughout the sector. The center's communication systems included astropathic facilities capable of transmitting messages across interstellar distances, tactical communication networks that could coordinate operations across entire star systems, and intelligence analysis capabilities that processed information from multiple sources to provide comprehensive threat assessments. The command center's design emphasized both functionality and the ceremonial requirements associated with chapter leadership, featuring meeting chambers where senior officers could conduct strategic planning sessions while maintaining the dignity appropriate to their positions. The Reclusium represented the spiritual heart of the fortress monastery, housing the chapter's most sacred artifacts and providing spaces for the religious ceremonies that maintain the Battle Brothers' spiritual connection to the Emperor and their Primarch. The chamber's design incorporated architectural elements that created an atmosphere of reverence and contemplation, with soaring vaulted ceilings supported by massive columns carved with scenes depicting the chapter's most heroic battles and the deeds of fallen heroes. The walls displayed battle honors earned during thousands of years of faithful service, creating a visual record of the chapter's history that inspired current battle brothers while honoring those who had given their lives for the Emperor. The sacred banners housed within the Reclusium included the chapter's original standard, blessed by the first chapter master, and carried into battle during the most significant engagements in the chapter's history. This ancient banner, woven from materials that had been consecrated through rituals dating back to the Great Crusade, bore the scars of countless battles while maintaining the symbolic power that made it one of the chapter's most precious possessions. The banner's presence during combat operations provided inspiration to battle brothers while serving as a tangible connection to their heritage and traditions. Among the chapter's most treasured relics were weapons that had belonged to legendary heroes whose deeds had become part of the Crimson Fist's oral tradition and written histories. These artifacts included power weapons whose machine spirits had been awakened through centuries of faithful service, bolt weapons that had never failed their wielders in critical moments, and pieces of armor that had protected their wearers through impossible odds. Each relic carried not only its practical value as a weapon or piece of equipment, but also the spiritual significance associated with its previous owners and their heroic actions. The chapter's collection of Great Crusade-era artifacts represented connections to the earliest days of human expansion across the galaxy, when the Emperor himself had led humanity's armies in the conquest of countless worlds. These relics included fragments of armor worn by Imperial Fists Legion veterans who had served directly under Rogel Dorn, weapons that had been blessed by the Primarch himself, and documents bearing the signatures of legendary figures from the chapter's founding era. The preservation of these artifacts required specialized storage conditions and careful handling protocols that ensured their survival across millennia while maintaining their spiritual and historical significance. The fortress-monastery's libraries contained comprehensive records of the chapter's tactical experiences, including detailed analyses of successful operations and honest assessments of failures that had resulted in unnecessary casualties or mission failures. These documents provided invaluable resources for training new battle brothers and developing improved tactical procedures based on empirical evidence rather than theoretical speculation. The library's collection included not only the chapter's own records, but also tactical manuals, historical accounts, and technical documentation acquired through cooperation with other Imperial institutions. The apothecarian's sophisticated facilities enabled the chapter's medical specialists to maintain the health of battle brothers, while conducting the complex procedures necessary for gene seed cultivation and implantation. The medical bay's equipment included surgical tools capable of operating on enhanced space marine physiology, monitoring devices that could track the vital signs of battle brothers in various states of consciousness, and storage systems that maintain the precise environmental conditions necessary for preserving genetic material. The apothecarian's design emphasized both functionality and the sacred nature of the work performed there, as the cultivation of gene seed represented one of the chapter's most important responsibilities. The catastrophic destruction that befell the fortress-monastery during the Ork invasion of 989 occurred with shocking suddenness that left the surviving battle brothers struggling to comprehend the magnitude of their losses. The massive orbital defense laser that had protected Rynn's world for millennia experienced a critical malfunction in its targeting systems during the height of the space battle against Snagrod's invasion fleet. Instead of engaging the Ork vessels descending toward the planet's surface, the weapon's energy beam carved directly through the fortress-monastery's central sections, penetrating multiple levels of reinforced armor before striking the primary ammunition storage facilities. The explosion that followed vaporized entire sections of the ancient structure while creating secondary detonations that rippled through the fortress-monastery's lower levels for several minutes. The blast wave shattered reinforced windows throughout the complex, while the seismic shock caused structural collapses in areas that had not been directly hit by the laser beam. The explosion's intensity created temperatures hot enough to melt adamantium components, while generating radiation levels that made immediate rescue operations impossible for the few battle brothers who had survived the initial catastrophe. The armory's destruction eliminated weapons and equipment that had been accumulated over thousands of years of continuous service, including irreplaceable artifacts whose loss represented not only tactical setbacks, but also spiritual devastation for the chapter's survivors. Master-crafted weapons that had been passed down through generations of battle brothers were reduced to radioactive slag in moments, while specialized equipment designed for specific tactical situations simply ceased to exist. The loss of the chapter's heavy weapons proved particularly devastating, as these systems could not be easily replaced through conventional Imperial supply channels. The vehicle bay's collapse buried dozens of tanks and transports under millions of tons of rubble, while destroying the maintenance facilities necessary for keeping surviving vehicles operational. The few vehicles that escaped destruction were trapped beneath debris that would require weeks of excavation work to clear, assuming that heavy equipment could be brought to the site despite the ongoing Ork invasion. The loss of the chapter's transport capacity severely limited their ability to respond rapidly to threats across Rynn's world's surface, while reducing their tactical flexibility during combat operations. The command center's destruction severed the chapter's communications with Imperial authorities throughout the sector, while eliminating the intelligence analysis capabilities that had enabled them to coordinate effective responses to regional threats. The loss of astropathic facilities prevented the transmission of distress calls that might have brought Imperial reinforcements more quickly, while the destruction of tactical communication systems made it impossible to coordinate with PDF forces defending other parts of the planet. The surviving Battle Brothers found themselves isolated not only from outside assistance, but also from accurate information about the broader tactical situation. The Reclusiam's obliteration represented perhaps the most spiritually devastating aspect of the fortress-monastery's destruction, as centuries of accumulated sacred artifacts and battle honors were reduced to radioactive debris within moments. The ancient battle standards that had inspired generations of Crimson Fists were vaporized along with the relics that had connected the chapter to its founding era and the heroic deeds of legendary Battle Brothers. The loss of these spiritual anchors created a crisis of identity that threatened to undermine the survivors' morale and fighting effectiveness during the critical battles that followed. The Apothecarian's destruction eliminated not only the medical facilities necessary for treating wounded Battle Brothers, but also the irreplaceable gene seed stocks that represented the chapter's future recruitment potential. Centuries of carefully preserved genetic material were lost in moments, creating an existential threat to the chapter's survival that extended far beyond the immediate tactical consequences of reduced manpower. The few apothecaries who survived the disaster faced the seemingly impossible task of rebuilding the chapter's genetic capabilities from whatever biological material they could recover from fallen Battle Brothers. The reconstruction efforts that began immediately after Rynn's world's liberation from Ork occupation required careful planning and resource allocation that balanced immediate tactical needs against long-term strategic requirements. The new fortress monastery's design incorporated lessons learned from the original structure's destruction while adapting to the reduced resources available to the decimated chapter. The construction process required cooperation with Adeptus Mechanicus engineers who could provide the technical expertise necessary for building sophisticated defensive systems while working within the constraints imposed by limited manpower and equipment. The new fortress monastery's defensive capabilities reflected both technological improvements developed during the millennia since the original structure's construction and tactical innovations inspired by the chapter's recent combat experiences. The defensive systems included multiple redundant targeting arrays that could prevent the kind of malfunction that had caused the original disaster, while the structural design emphasized compartmentalization that could limit the spread of damage if similar catastrophes occurred in the future. The weapon emplacements incorporated improved fields of fire and better integration with natural terrain features that enhanced their effectiveness against potential attackers. The reconstruction of the Reclusiam required particular attention to creating spaces that could serve the chapter's spiritual needs while acknowledging the fundamental changes that had occurred in their circumstances and identity. The new chamber's design honored the memory of the artifacts and battle honors that had been lost while providing frameworks for developing new traditions that could inspire future generations of Battle Brothers. The surviving chaplains worked closely with the chapter's leadership to establish ceremonies and practices that maintained connection to the chapter's heritage while adapting to their transformed situation. The memorial sections within the new Reclusiam specifically honored the Battle Brothers who had perished during the fortress monastery's destruction and the subsequent defense of New Rynn City. These areas featured detailed records of the heroic actions performed by individual Space Marines during the crisis, creating permanent remembrances that would inspire future Battle Brothers, while ensuring that the sacrifices made during the chapter's darkest hour would not be forgotten. The memorial's design emphasized both the magnitude of the losses suffered and the courage displayed by those who had given their lives in defense of Imperial citizens. The Volgan Wars marked the Crimson Fists' first major test as an independent chapter, establishing their reputation throughout the Loki sector during the early centuries following their founding. These conflicts erupted when the Volgan Confederacy, a collection of human worlds that had rejected imperial compliance during the Great Crusade, launched coordinated attacks against newly established imperial colonies along the sector's eastern frontier. The Confederacy's military forces employed advanced technology salvaged from Dark Age relics, including energy weapons and defensive systems that exceeded standard Imperial Guard capabilities. Their fleet consisted of heavily modified warships that could challenge Imperial Navy vessels in direct combat while maintaining superior mobility through unconventional warp drive configurations. The Crimson Fists received their deployment orders directly from Segmentum Command, marking their first independent operation without oversight from their parent Imperial Fists Legion. Chapter Master Demetrius Catafalque led the entire chapter strength of nearly 1,000 battle brothers aboard a fleet of newly commissioned strike cruisers and escort vessels. The campaign's objectives required the systematic reduction of 12 fortified worlds while minimizing damage to industrial infrastructure that would be needed for future Imperial development. This dual requirement of military conquest and preservation created tactical challenges that demanded innovative approaches to siege warfare. The opening engagement occurred in the Volgan Prime system, where Confederate forces had established orbital defense platforms around their capital world using technology that generated energy shields capable of deflecting conventional bombardment. The Crimson Fist's fleet engaged these defenses in a series of running battles that tested their crew's abilities while providing valuable experience in void warfare tactics. The chapter's Tech Marines worked closely with Imperial Navy specialists to develop targeting solutions that could penetrate the Confederate shields through concentrated fire from multiple vessels simultaneously. The planetary assault on Volgan Prime demonstrated the effectiveness of the tactical doctrines that would become the chapter's signature approach to urban warfare. Confederate defenders had fortified the planet's primary hive city with defensive systems that turned every major structure into a potential strongpoint. The Crimson Fists responded by establishing secure landing zones in the city's outskirts before advancing systematically through the urban terrain, clearing each building methodically while maintaining unit cohesion and communication. Their approach emphasized the coordination of heavy weapons teams with assault squads, creating combined arms formations that could adapt to the changing tactical conditions encountered in three-dimensional urban combat. The Siege of Volgan Secundus required different tactical approaches as Confederate forces had withdrawn to massive underground complexes that extended deep beneath the planet's surface. These subterranean fortifications included manufacturing facilities, living quarters, and defensive positions connected by tunnels that could accommodate armored vehicles and large troop formations. The Crimson Fists adapted their surface warfare techniques to the confined spaces and limited visibility of underground combat, developing specialized equipment and tactics that would prove valuable during future campaigns against enemies who employed similar defensive strategies. The campaign's duration extended over several years as the chapter systematically reduced each Confederate stronghold while dealing with guerrilla attacks and sabotage operations conducted by resistance cells that had been established throughout the conquered territories. These irregular warfare challenges required the Crimson Fists to develop counterinsurgency capabilities that complemented their expertise in conventional siege operations. The chapter's battle brothers learned to work effectively with local Imperial Guard units and civilian administrators to establish security networks that could identify and eliminate resistance activities while maintaining the support of populations that had been liberated from Confederate control. The Volgan War's conclusion established the Crimson Fists as the Loki sector's primary military response force for situations requiring specialized siege warfare capabilities. The chapter's performance during these campaigns earned recognition from sector command authorities, who began requesting their deployment for operations against fortified positions throughout the region. The battle honors awarded for their service included the right to display campaign badges commemorating their victories at Volgan Prime, Volgan Secundus, and 8 other worlds that had been brought into Imperial compliance through their efforts. The centuries following the Volgan Wars brought numerous smaller campaigns against Ork incursions that tested the chapter's ability to respond rapidly to threats across the sector's vast expanse. These engagements typically involved Ork raiding fleets that targeted Imperial shipping lanes or established temporary bases on uninhabited worlds before launching attacks against nearby colonies. The Crimson Fists developed rapid deployment capabilities that allowed them to respond to these threats before Ork forces could establish permanent footholds or inflict significant damage on Imperial infrastructure. The Gauntlet incursion of the 35th millennium required the chapter to coordinate with multiple Imperial Guard regiments during a campaign against an Ork Waaagh that had conquered several agricultural worlds vital to the sector's food production. Warlord Gauntlet had unified numerous Ork clans under his leadership while establishing manufacturing centers that could produce the weapons and vehicles needed for sustained military operations. The resulting conflict tested the Crimson Fist's ability to conduct offensive operations against prepared Ork positions while working alongside conventional Imperial forces that lacked their specialized urban warfare capabilities. The campaign's opening phases involved joint operations where Crimson Fist's companies provided heavy assault capabilities that could breach Ork defensive lines, while Imperial Guard regiments exploited the gaps created by Space Marine attacks. These coordinated operations required extensive planning and communication between different command structures, as Imperial Guard officers needed to understand Space Marine capabilities, while Crimson Fist's commanders learned to account for the limitations and strengths of conventional forces. The successful integration of different military organizations created tactical approaches that maximized the effectiveness of combined Imperial forces. The siege of Gauzak's primary fortress demonstrated the chapter's ability to adapt their urban warfare expertise to the crude but effective defensive structures favored by Ork engineers. The fortress consisted of massive scrap metal walls reinforced with salvaged armor plating from destroyed Imperial vehicles, creating defensive barriers that could withstand significant punishment while providing platforms for Ork heavy weapons. The Crimson Fists responded by employing their Devastator squads in coordinated bombardment patterns that systematically weakened key structural points before assault teams advanced through the breaches created by concentrated firepower. The Eldar raids of the 38th millennium presented different tactical challenges as the Xenos forces employed hit-and-run tactics that avoided the kind of direct confrontations where the Crimson Fist's defensive expertise provided maximum advantage. The Eldar attackers targeted Imperial installations with surgical precision before withdrawing through webway portals that made pursuit impossible using conventional methods. The chapter adapted their response procedures to emphasize rapid deployment and immediate counterattack capabilities that could engage Eldar forces before they completed their objectives and withdrew to safety. These campaigns against Eldar raiders required the development of intelligence-gathering capabilities that could predict likely targets and position response forces accordingly. The chapter's scouts worked closely with Imperial intelligence services to analyze Eldar attack patterns while identifying the strategic objectives that made certain installations attractive targets. This analysis enabled the Crimson Fists to establish defensive positions at probable attack sites while maintaining rapid response capabilities that could reinforce threatened locations when intelligence predictions proved inaccurate. The Armageddon Wars represented the most significant military campaigns in the Crimson Fist's history prior to the disaster that would befall their homeworld. The chapter's participation in the Second War for Armageddon brought them into direct conflict with Gaz-Kulthraka's massive Waaagh, testing their combat capabilities against one of the largest Ork invasions ever recorded. The strategic importance of Armageddon's industrial capacity made its defense a priority for Imperial forces throughout the segmentum, resulting in the deployment of multiple Space Marine chapters alongside numerous Imperial Guard regiments and Titan legions. The Crimson Fist's deployment to Armageddon placed them in the Hades Hive sector, where their urban warfare expertise proved essential for defending the massive industrial complexes that produced weapons and equipment for Imperial forces throughout the region. The Hive City's structure created ideal conditions for the kind of defensive operations that maximized the chapter's tactical advantages while limiting the effectiveness of Ork numerical superiority. The Battle Brothers established defensive positions throughout the Hive's multiple levels, creating overlapping fields of fire that could engage Ork attackers while providing mutual support between different defensive positions. The Siege of Hades' Hive lasted for months as Ork forces launched repeated assaults against the Imperial defensive lines while attempting to capture the industrial facilities intact for their own use. The Crimson Fist's defensive positions withstood these attacks through careful positioning and the effective employment of heavy weapons that could engage Ork formations at maximum range. The chapter's Devastator squads proved particularly effective in this environment, using their las cannons and missile launchers to destroy Ork vehicles before they could reach the defensive perimeter, while maintaining accurate fire against infantry targets advancing through the Hive's corridors. The counteroffensive that ultimately drove Ork forces from Hades' Hive required the Crimson Fists to transition from defensive operations to coordinated assault tactics that could exploit weaknesses in Ork positions created by sustained defensive fire. The chapter's tactical squads advanced through areas that had been cleared by Devastator fire, while assault squads used jump packs to reach Ork positions that conventional infantry could not access. These combined operations demonstrated the chapter's tactical flexibility while maintaining the unit cohesion essential for Space Marine effectiveness in urban combat environments. The Third War for Armageddon saw the Crimson Fists return to the embattled world as part of a massive Imperial response to Ghazghkull's second invasion attempt. The chapter's previous experience fighting on Armageddon provided valuable intelligence about Ork tactical preferences and the most effective defensive positions within the Hive cities. This knowledge enabled them to establish improved defensive lines that incorporated lessons learned during the previous campaign while adapting to changes in Ork equipment and tactics that had occurred during the intervening years. The chapter's participation in the Armageddon campaigns earned them numerous battle honors and established relationships with other Space Marine chapters that would prove valuable during future operations. The tactical cooperation developed with the Salamanders and Black Templars during joint operations created informal networks that enabled information sharing and mutual support during subsequent campaigns. These relationships extended beyond simple military cooperation to include technical exchanges between Tech Marines and coordination between chaplains responsible for maintaining the spiritual welfare of Battle Brothers deployed far from their home chapters. Throughout their operational history, the Crimson Fists conducted numerous defensive actions across the galactic Southwest that demonstrated their ability to protect Imperial interests against diverse threats, ranging from chaos cultist uprisings to Xenos invasions. These campaigns typically involved the deployment of individual companies or battle groups rather than the chapter's full strength, requiring company commanders to operate independently while maintaining coordination with local Imperial authorities. The decentralized nature of these operations tested the chapter's leadership development and tactical flexibility while providing combat experience for Battle Brothers at all levels of the organizational hierarchy. The defense of Corinth involved a single Crimson Fists company that successfully held a strategic spaceport against a Chaos Space Marine warband seeking to establish a foothold in the Loki sector. The engagement demonstrated the effectiveness of the chapter's defensive tactics against enemies who possessed similar capabilities and equipment, requiring tactical innovations that could counter the advantages typically enjoyed by Space Marine forces. The successful defense relied on careful positioning and the effective use of terrain features that channeled the attackers into predetermined killing zones while limiting their ability to employ their own heavy weapons effectively. The Siege of Mordian 7 required the chapter to coordinate with Mordian Iron Guard regiments during a campaign against Ork forces that had established fortified positions throughout throughout the planet's industrial centers. The collaboration between Crimson Fist's tactical expertise and Mordian discipline created combined formations that could conduct siege operations with unprecedented effectiveness. The campaign's success led to the development of standardized procedures for integrating Space Marine and Imperial Guard capabilities during urban warfare operations, creating tactical doctrines that would be employed throughout the sector during subsequent campaigns. The liberation of the Sanctuary Moon involved operations against Dark Eldar raiders who had established a temporary base in the ruins of an ancient Imperial facility. The campaign required the chapter to adapt their urban warfare techniques to the unique challenges posed by Dark Eldar technology and tactics, including weapons that could phase through conventional armor and transportation systems that operated through dimensional manipulation. The successful completion of this mission demonstrated the chapter's ability to adapt their proven tactical approaches to counter exotic threats that employed capabilities far beyond conventional military technology. The immediate aftermath of the Rynn's world catastrophe presented Pedro Cantor and his surviving battle brothers with challenges that extended far beyond conventional military reconstruction. The fortress-monastery's destruction had eliminated not only the physical infrastructure necessary for chapter operations, but also the accumulated knowledge, traditions, and sacred artifacts that had defined the Crimson Fist's identity for nearly 10 millennia. The surviving apothecaries faced the grim reality that their gene seed stocks had been reduced to whatever biological material they could harvest from the fallen, while the chapter's recruitment capabilities had been effectively eliminated by the loss of specialized medical facilities and genetic cultivation equipment. The process of cataloging their losses required weeks of careful excavation through the radioactive ruins of their former stronghold. Surviving Techmarines led teams of servo skulls and construction servitors through the twisted wreckage, searching for any equipment or materials that might have survived the catastrophic explosion. The few weapons recovered from the armory's ruins showed severe radiation damage that made them unsafe for use without extensive reconditioning, while most of the chapter's vehicles had been crushed beyond repair beneath millions of tons of collapsed masonry and twisted metal superstructure. The psychological impact on the surviving veterans proved as challenging as the material losses they had suffered. Battle brothers who had served the chapter for centuries found themselves confronting the complete destruction of everything they had known and protected throughout their extended lifespans. The loss of the Reclusiam's sacred banners and relics had severed their tangible connections to the chapter's history, while the deaths of so many experienced sergeants and specialists had eliminated the informal networks of mentorship and brotherhood that had sustained chapter culture across generations of service. Cantor recognized that maintaining morale among the survivors required immediate action to establish new purposes and objectives that could channel their grief and anger into productive reconstruction efforts. The chapter master organized the surviving battle brothers into work details that combined essential reconstruction tasks with combat training exercises, ensuring that they remained operationally ready while contributing to the chapter's recovery. These activities provided structure and purpose during the darkest period in the chapter's history, preventing the kind of psychological deterioration that could have destroyed their effectiveness as fighting men. The establishment of temporary command facilities in New Rynn City created the foundation for coordinating reconstruction efforts while maintaining the chapter's operational capabilities. The city's civilian authorities provided whatever resources they could spare for supporting the Space Marines who had saved their lives, including construction equipment, raw materials, and technical expertise from local engineers and craftsmen. This cooperation between the chapter and Rynn's world's population created stronger bonds than had existed previously, as civilians understood that their survival depended directly on the Crimson Fist's recovery and continued protection. The recruitment challenges facing the decimated chapter required fundamental modifications to selection and training procedures that had been refined over millennia of continuous operation. The traditional approach of carefully evaluating potential candidates over extended periods became a luxury the chapter could no longer afford, as their reduced numbers demanded rapid expansion to maintain operational effectiveness against ongoing threats throughout the low-key sector. The surviving chaplains worked with company commanders to develop accelerated screening processes that could identify suitable candidates while maintaining the quality standards essential for Space Marine transformation. The shortage of experienced trainers meant that newly inducted battle brothers received instruction from sergeants who had themselves been recently promoted to fill gaps left by casualties suffered during the fortress-monastery disaster. This compressed leadership development created potential problems, as inexperienced officers attempted to train recruits while adapting to their own expanded responsibilities. Cantor addressed these challenges by establishing mentorship programs that paired surviving veterans with newly promoted leaders, ensuring that institutional knowledge could be transmitted despite the disruption of traditional training hierarchies. The accelerated training programs implemented during the Reconstruction period required careful balancing between the need for rapid force expansion and the maintenance of combat effectiveness standards that distinguished Space Marines from conventional Imperial forces. The chapter's apothecaries developed modified implementation schedules that compressed the traditional multi-year process into shorter timeframes, while monitoring recipients for adverse reactions that might indicate incompatibility with the accelerated procedures. These modifications carried risks that could have resulted in higher failure rates or reduced physical capabilities among successful candidates. The gene seed shortage created existential concerns that extended far beyond immediate recruitment limitations, as the chapter's long-term survival depended on rebuilding their genetic stocks to sustainable levels. The few apothecaries who had survived the disaster worked desperately to recover any viable genetic material from battle brothers who had died during the Ork invasion, often operating under dangerous conditions as radiation levels in the fortress-monastery ruins remained lethal to unprotected humans. Their efforts yielded limited quantities of usable gene seed that had to be carefully rationed between immediate recruitment needs and long-term cultivation requirements. The integration of new recruits into the drastically reduced chapter structure required organizational innovations that departed from traditional Codex Astartes formations while maintaining operational effectiveness. Companies that had been reduced to squad strength formations were consolidated with survivors from other units, creating mixed formations where battle brothers from different tactical specializations worked together under unfamiliar command structures. These hybrid units initially suffered from coordination problems, as warriors trained for specific roles adapted to new responsibilities within reorganized formations. The psychological challenges faced by surviving veterans extended beyond simple grief over their losses to include survivors' guilt and uncertainty about their ability to rebuild what had been destroyed. Many battle brothers struggled with feelings of failure for not preventing the disaster that had befallen their chapter, while others questioned whether the Crimson Fists could ever recover their former strength and reputation. The chapter's chaplains played crucial roles in addressing these psychological issues through counseling sessions and modified ceremonies that acknowledged their losses while emphasizing the importance of continuing their service to the Emperor. The establishment of new traditions and ceremonies required careful attention to maintaining continuity with the chapter's heritage while adapting to their transformed circumstances. The surviving chaplains worked with Cantor to develop memorial services that honored fallen battle brothers without dwelling excessively on their losses, creating rituals that celebrated heroic sacrifice while inspiring continued dedication to duty. These new ceremonies incorporated elements salvaged from the chapter's destroyed traditions, while establishing frameworks for future commemorations that could grow with the rebuilt organization. The reconstruction of training facilities required extensive cooperation with Adeptus Mechanicus engineers who could provide the technical expertise necessary for building sophisticated combat simulation systems and weapons ranges. The new facilities incorporated lessons learned from the original fortress monastery's destruction, emphasizing distributed systems that could continue functioning even if individual components were damaged or destroyed. The training complex included modular components that could be rapidly reconfigured to accommodate different types of exercises while maintaining the safety standards necessary for Space Marine training programs. The strategic adjustments implemented during the Reconstruction period reflected hard-learned lessons about the vulnerabilities that had contributed to the chapter's near destruction. The new defensive doctrines emphasized redundancy in critical systems and distributed command structures that could maintain operational effectiveness even if primary facilities were compromised. These modifications required extensive retraining for surviving officers who had to learn new procedures while adapting to reduced resources and personnel limitations that affected every aspect of chapter operations. The development of new tactical approaches incorporated insights gained from the desperate defense of New Rynn City, where conventional doctrine had been modified by necessity to maximize effectiveness against overwhelming odds. The chapter's experience fighting with minimal equipment and reduced numbers had demonstrated the importance of tactical flexibility and improvisation skills that complemented their traditional expertise in defensive operations. These lessons were incorporated into training programs that prepared battle brothers for operations where standard equipment and support might not be available. The coordination with other Imperial institutions became essential for the chapter's survival, as their reduced capabilities required external assistance for functions they had previously handled independently. The establishment of formal relationships with Imperial Guard regiments, naval units, and Adeptus Mechanicus facilities created support networks that could provide resources and expertise unavailable within the decimated chapter. These arrangements required diplomatic skills that many Space Marine officers had never needed to develop, as they negotiated agreements that balanced the chapter's needs against the requirements of other Imperial organizations. The fleet reconstruction efforts required careful prioritization, as the chapter's reduced numbers could not effectively crew the number of vessels needed for their traditional operational requirements. The surviving ships required extensive repairs and modifications to accommodate reduced crew sizes while maintaining combat effectiveness against potential threats. The chapter's tech marines worked with Imperial Navy specialists to develop automated systems that could handle routine operations while preserving manual control for critical combat functions that required human judgment and decision-making capabilities. The establishment of new recruitment networks throughout Rynn's world required expansion beyond the traditional noble houses that had provided most candidates throughout the chapter's history. The devastation caused by the Ork invasion had disrupted many established social structures while creating opportunities for individuals from different backgrounds to demonstrate the qualities valued by Space Marine recruiters. The chapter's scouts established contact with refugee communities and resistance groups that had formed during the occupation, identifying potential candidates who had proven their courage and determination under extreme conditions. The modification of selection trials reflected both the urgent need for new recruits and the lessons learned about the qualities that enabled individuals to survive and function effectively during catastrophic situations. The traditional emphasis on individual prowess was supplemented with tests that evaluated candidates' ability to work effectively in small groups and maintain morale under conditions of extreme adversity. These modifications recognized that the rebuilt chapter would require battle brothers who could function effectively in undermanned units while supporting their comrades through difficult circumstances. The accelerated training schedules implemented during the Reconstruction period required intensive instruction that compressed years of traditional education into months of concentrated learning. The surviving veterans served as instructors who transmitted essential knowledge, while battle brothers continued their own recovery from physical and psychological wounds suffered during the disaster. This compressed training approach created risks of inadequate preparation, but the chapter's immediate operational requirements demanded rapid force expansion, despite the potential consequences of reduced training time. The integration of new battle brothers into existing units created cultural challenges as recruits from diverse backgrounds adapted to Space Marine traditions, while veterans adjusted to working with inexperienced comrades. The traditional bonds of brotherhood that developed over years of shared service had to be established quickly among battle brothers who lacked common experiences and training backgrounds. The chapter's leadership addressed these integration challenges through intensive team-building exercises and shared combat operations that created bonds of mutual dependence and trust. The reconstruction of the chapter's intelligence capabilities required rebuilding networks of contacts and information sources that had been developed over centuries of continuous operation throughout the Loki sector. The loss of experienced intelligence officers and their accumulated knowledge about regional threats and political dynamics left significant gaps in the chapter's situational awareness. The establishment of new intelligence networks required time and resources that the chapter could barely afford, while facing ongoing security threats that demanded immediate attention and response capabilities. The bonds connecting the Crimson Fists to their fellow Imperial Fists successors run deeper than mere genetic heritage, encompassing shared tactical doctrines, cultural traditions, and mutual obligations that have endured across 10 millennia of separate development. The Black Templars represent perhaps the most divergent interpretation of Rogal Dorn's legacy, their zealous crusading nature standing in stark contrast to the Crimson Fist's more measured approach to warfare. Despite these philosophical differences, both chapters maintain cordial relationships built on mutual respect for their shared origins and recognition of each other's combat effectiveness in their respective operational specializations. The relationship between Pedro Cantor and High Marshal Helbrecht exemplifies the complex dynamics that govern interactions between Imperial Fist's successor chapters. Both leaders inherited the stubborn determination characteristic of Dorn's gene seed, but their tactical philosophies reflect different interpretations of how this trait should manifest in actual combat operations. Helbrecht's preference for aggressive crusading campaigns contrasts sharply with Cantor's emphasis on defensive operations and careful resource management, yet both approaches have proven effective within their respective operational environments. During the Third War for Armageddon, these different tactical approaches created productive synergy, as Black Templars assault companies provided the offensive capabilities needed to exploit weaknesses identified by Crimson Fist's reconnaissance operations. The coordination between the two chapters demonstrated how divergent tactical doctrines could complement each other when properly integrated under unified command structures. The success of these joint operations led to informal agreements regarding mutual support during future campaigns where both chapters' capabilities might be required. The Iron Fists maintain closer tactical alignment with the Crimson Fists due to their shared emphasis on siege warfare and defensive operations, though their recruitment practices and organizational culture reflect the influence of their own homeworld's unique characteristics. Regular exchanges between the chapter's tech marines have resulted in shared innovations in fortification design and siege equipment that have benefited both organizations. These technical collaborations have produced standardized defensive protocols that can be implemented rapidly when joint operations require coordinated defensive positions. The excoriator's penitent nature and emphasis on self-sacrifice create philosophical tensions with the Crimson Fist's more pragmatic approach to warfare, though both chapters share appreciation for the defensive expertise inherited from their Primarch. The excoriator's willingness to accept massive casualties in pursuit of tactical objectives sometimes conflicts with the Crimson Fist's preference for careful planning and resource conservation. Despite these differences, both chapters have cooperated effectively during campaigns where their combined capabilities were required to overcome particularly challenging enemies. The Soul Drinker's tragic fall to chaos corruption served as a sobering reminder to all Imperial Fist successors about the constant vigilance required to maintain genetic and spiritual purity. The Crimson Fist's response to their erstwhile brother's corruption involved increased cooperation with other Loyalist successors to ensure that similar deviations could be identified and addressed before reaching critical stages. The establishment of regular gene seed purity verification protocols between Imperial Fist successors reflected their collective determination to prevent similar tragedies from affecting other chapters. The broader network of Imperial Fist successors includes numerous smaller chapters whose specialized capabilities complement the larger organization's strategic roles within Imperial defense planning. The Crimson Fists maintain liaison relationships with these smaller chapters, providing technical assistance and tactical expertise while receiving intelligence about regional threats and emerging tactical developments. These relationships create informal networks that enable rapid information sharing and coordinated responses to threats that might overwhelm individual chapters operating in isolation. The cooperation between Imperial Fist successors extends beyond simple military coordination to include cultural exchanges that help preserve the traditions and knowledge inherited from their shared Primarch. Regular gatherings of chapter representatives provide opportunities for sharing tactical innovations, discussing theological interpretations of Dorn's teachings, and maintaining the bonds of brotherhood that connect all sons of the 7th Primarch. These meetings often result in joint training exercises that allow battle brothers from different chapters to learn from each other's experiences and tactical specializations. The Loki sector's Imperial Guard regiments have developed particularly close working relationships with the Crimson Fists due to their shared operational theater and the mutual benefits derived from coordinated military operations. The Rynnite Guard serves as the primary interface between the chapter and conventional Imperial forces, their hybrid organization combining Space Marine tactical expertise with Imperial Guard operational procedures. This unique structure enables seamless integration between Astartes and conventional forces during joint operations that require both specialized capabilities and numerical strength. The Mordian Iron Guard's disciplined approach to warfare aligns closely with the Crimson Fist's methodical tactical preferences, creating natural compatibility during joint operations that require precise coordination between different unit types. The Iron Guard's expertise in urban warfare and their reputation for maintaining formation integrity under extreme pressure complement the Space Marines' shock assault capabilities. Joint training exercises between Crimson Fists companies and Iron Guard regiments have resulted in standardized communication protocols and tactical procedures that maximize the effectiveness of combined operations. The Vestroyan Firstborn regiments operating within the Loki sector bring specialized equipment and technical expertise that enhance the overall military capabilities available to Sector Command. Their sophisticated communications equipment and advanced targeting systems provide conventional forces with capabilities that approach Space Marine standards in some applications. The Crimson Fists have worked closely with Vestroyan technical specialists to develop improved coordination procedures that allow Imperial Guard heavy weapons teams to provide effective fire support for Space Marine assault operations. The Catachan Jungle Fighter's unconventional warfare expertise provides capabilities that complement the Crimson Fist's more traditional tactical approaches, particularly during operations against enemies who employ guerrilla tactics or operate in challenging environmental conditions. The Catachan's ability to function effectively without extensive logistical support makes them valuable allies during extended campaigns where supply lines might be disrupted or compromised. Joint operations have demonstrated the effectiveness of combining Catachan reconnaissance capabilities with Crimson Fist's assault expertise. The relationship between the Crimson Fists and various Imperial Navy commands reflects the mutual dependence between Space Marine chapters and naval forces for transportation, fire support, and strategic mobility. The chapter's fleet requirements have historically been met through cooperation with Battle Fleet Solar and regional naval commands, though the losses suffered during the Rynn's World disaster created temporary gaps in their space-based capabilities. The reconstruction of the chapter's fleet required extensive negotiations with Imperial Navy authorities to secure replacement vessels and the crews needed to operate them effectively. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains particularly important relationships with the Crimson Fists due to their mutual interests in preserving ancient technology and developing improved military equipment. The chapter's Techmarines regularly cooperate with Mechanicus engineers on projects ranging from vehicle maintenance to the development of specialized siege equipment. These collaborations have resulted in numerous technological innovations that have enhanced the chapter's combat effectiveness while advancing the Mechanicus's understanding of Space Marine operational requirements. The tensions that occasionally arise between the Crimson Fists and other Space Marine chapters typically stem from competing claims over operational jurisdiction or disagreements about tactical priorities during joint operations. The chapter's reputation for methodical planning and careful resource management sometimes conflicts with other chapters' preferences for rapid, aggressive action that prioritizes immediate results over long-term strategic considerations. These philosophical differences have led to friction during campaigns where unified command structures required compromise between different tactical approaches. The rivalry with the Marines Malevolent represents one of the most significant ongoing tensions affecting the Crimson Fist's relationships within the broader Astartes community. The Marines' Malevolent's callous disregard for civilian casualties and their willingness to sacrifice Imperial Guard units for tactical advantage directly contradict the Crimson Fist's commitment to protecting innocent lives. These fundamental philosophical differences have resulted in several confrontations during joint operations where the two chapters' tactical approaches proved incompatible. During the Armageddon campaigns, the Marines' Malevolent's decision to bombard civilian areas to eliminate Ork positions created immediate conflict with Crimson Fist's forces who were attempting to evacuate non-combatants from the affected zones. The resulting argument between company commanders nearly escalated to armed confrontation before intervention by senior Imperial Guard officers restored tactical coordination. The incident highlighted the challenges that arise when chapters with fundamentally different approaches to warfare are required to cooperate during major campaigns. The competition for resources and equipment allocations creates ongoing tensions between various Space Marine chapters operating within the same sector or region. The Crimson Fist's reconstruction efforts following the Rynn's world disaster required significant material support that might otherwise have been allocated to other chapters' operational requirements. These resource allocation decisions often involve complex negotiations between chapter representatives and imperial bureaucracies that must balance competing claims while maintaining overall military effectiveness throughout the region. The disputes over recruitment rights and territorial boundaries occasionally create friction between Space Marine chapters whose operational areas overlap or whose recruitment practices target similar population groups. The Crimson Fist's exclusive relationship with Rynn's world eliminates most potential conflicts over recruitment territories, but their expansion of recruiting efforts to other worlds within the Loki sector has sometimes created tensions with chapters that claimed prior rights to evaluate potential candidates from those populations. The coordination challenges that arise during multi-chapter operations reflect the difficulties inherent in integrating different tactical doctrines, command structures, and operational procedures under unified leadership. The Crimson Fist's preference for careful planning and methodical execution sometimes conflicts with other chapters' emphasis on rapid deployment and aggressive assault tactics. These differences require extensive pre-operational coordination to ensure that all participating units understand their roles and can execute their missions without interfering with other chapters' activities. The intelligence sharing arrangements between different Space Marine chapters create both opportunities for enhanced operational effectiveness and potential security vulnerabilities that must be carefully managed. The Crimson Fists maintain formal intelligence exchange agreements with several other chapters, particularly those operating in adjacent sectors or facing similar threats. These arrangements enable rapid dissemination of tactical intelligence about enemy capabilities and movements, while requiring careful protocols to protect sensitive information about chapter capabilities and operational plans. The role of the Crimson Fists within the broader Imperial defense strategy reflects their specialized capabilities and strategic location rather than their overall chapter strength or political influence. The Loki sector's position along critical shipping routes and its proximity to unstable frontier regions makes it a strategically important area that requires reliable military forces capable of responding rapidly to diverse threats. The chapter's expertise in urban warfare and siege operations makes them particularly valuable for defending the heavily populated industrial worlds that form the sector's economic foundation. The regional security responsibilities assigned to the Crimson Fists include not only direct military operations against external threats, but also supporting roles in maintaining internal stability and combating insurgent activities. The chapter's relationship with local civilian authorities enables them to provide expertise and resources for counterinsurgency operations, while maintaining the political neutrality expected of Space Marine organizations. These activities require careful balance between military effectiveness and political sensitivity to avoid undermining Imperial governmental authority. The strategic mobility provided by the chapter's fleet enables them to respond to threats throughout their assigned operational area, while maintaining their primary defensive responsibilities on Rynn's world. The coordination between fleet operations and ground-based forces requires sophisticated logistics planning that accounts for travel times, supply requirements, and the need to maintain adequate defensive forces at critical locations. The chapter's tactical doctrine emphasizes the importance of maintaining strategic reserves that can be deployed rapidly to address emerging threats without compromising existing defensive commitments. The integration of the Crimson Fists into broader Imperial military planning involves regular coordination with sector command authorities who must balance the chapter's capabilities against competing demands from other military units and strategic priorities. The chapter's reputation for reliability and tactical expertise makes them valuable assets for operations requiring specialized capabilities, but their reduced strength following the Rynn's world disaster has limited their ability to undertake major independent operations. The ongoing reconstruction efforts continue to influence strategic planning as the chapter works to restore their full operational capabilities while maintaining their existing commitments and responsibilities. The opening of the Great Rift fundamentally altered the strategic landscape throughout the Imperium, creating new challenges that demanded innovative responses from Space Marine chapters already stretched thin by millennia of constant warfare. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in half disrupted astropathic communications across vast regions, while unleashing demonic incursions that threatened established Imperial strongholds throughout the segmentum. For the Crimson Fists, still rebuilding from their catastrophic losses during the Rynn's world disaster, these developments created both opportunities for redemption and existential threats that could complete the destruction that Snagrod's Waaagh had begun. The arrival of the Indomitus Crusade brought hope to beleaguered Imperial forces throughout the galaxy, but for the Crimson Fists, it represented something more profound: the possibility of genuine reconstruction rather than mere survival. Roboute Guilliman's return as Lord Commander of the Imperium had initiated sweeping reforms that included the creation of Primaris Space Marines, enhanced warriors whose superior capabilities and equipment could potentially restore depleted chapters to full operational strength. The technological innovations developed on Mars during the 10 millennia of Guilliman's absence offered solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable using traditional methods and resources. The integration of Primaris Marines into the Crimson Fists required careful navigation of cultural and practical challenges that extended far beyond simple recruitment expansion. The new warriors possessed physical capabilities that exceeded those of traditional Astartes, their enhanced organs, and improved power armor providing advantages in combat situations that had previously demanded careful tactical planning to overcome through coordination and positioning. However, their lack of shared history with the chapter's surviving veterans created potential friction between battle brothers who had earned their positions through decades of service and newcomers, whose genetic enhancements provided capabilities that veteran warriors had never possessed. Pedro Cantor approached the integration process with the same methodical planning that had characterized his leadership throughout the Reconstruction period following the fortress-monastery disaster. Rather than simply incorporating Primaris Marines as replacement personnel for depleted companies, he established mixed formations that paired experienced veterans with enhanced warriors, creating opportunities for knowledge transfer while building the personal relationships essential for unit cohesion. These hybrid squads initially experienced coordination problems as traditional Astartes adapted to fighting alongside warriors whose superior physical capabilities sometimes enabled tactical approaches that conventional Space Marines could not execute effectively. The Mark X Tacticus power armor worn by Primaris Marines provided significant improvements in protection and battlefield awareness compared to the traditional Mark VII suits that had equipped Crimson Fists for centuries. The enhanced sensor systems and improved communications capabilities enabled better coordination during urban warfare operations, while the armor's superior protective qualities allowed Primaris Marines to advance through fire zones that would have been prohibitively dangerous for conventional Astartes. However, the different maintenance requirements and specialized components needed for Mark X armor created logistical challenges for Tech Marines already struggling to maintain equipment with limited resources and personnel. The bolt rifles carried by Primaris intercessors represented evolutionary improvements over traditional bolt weapons, their longer range and improved ammunition capacity providing tactical advantages during the defensive operations that remain the chapter's primary specialization. The weapon's enhanced accuracy and penetration capabilities proved particularly valuable during urban combat, where precise shot placement could eliminate threats while minimizing collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. The integration of these improved weapons into existing tactical doctrines required modifications to fire control procedures and ammunition logistics that had been optimized for conventional bolt weapons over thousands of years of continuous use. The Primaris vehicle pool introduced capabilities that the Crimson Fists had never possessed in their traditional organization, including the repulsor grav tanks that could provide fire support and transportation without requiring the road networks that limited conventional tracked vehicles during urban operations. These advanced vehicles incorporated sophisticated targeting systems and defensive countermeasures that enhanced their survivability in contested environments, though their complex technology demanded maintenance expertise that exceeded the capabilities of traditionally trained Tech Marines. The chapter's technical specialists required extensive retraining to service and repair equipment that incorporated principles derived from Dark Age of Technology archives rather than traditional Imperial manufacturing techniques. The strategic implications of the Great Rift's formation created new operational requirements that tested the Crimson Fist's adaptability while providing opportunities to demonstrate their value within the transformed Imperial military structure. The warp storms that accompanied the Rift's opening disrupted established shipping routes and communication networks throughout the Loki sector, isolating previously secure worlds and creating opportunities for enemy forces to establish footholds in regions that had been considered safely within Imperial control. The chapter's expertise in siege warfare and urban combat became increasingly valuable as Imperial forces faced the challenge of reclaiming fortified positions from enemies who had months or years to prepare defensive positions. The emergence of new chaos threats following the Great Rift's opening required tactical adaptations that incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters with traitor forces while accounting for the enhanced capabilities provided by warp energy unleashed by the massive stellar phenomenon. Demon incursions that had previously been limited to specific worlds or systems became more frequent and widespread, requiring rapid response capabilities that could contain supernatural threats before they established permanent footholds in real space. The Crimson Fist's defensive expertise proved valuable in these situations, as their understanding of fortification principles could be applied to creating barriers that limited demonic manifestation while providing secure positions for conventional forces. The coordination challenges created by disrupted communications networks forced Space Marine chapters throughout the Imperium to operate with greater independence while maintaining their responsibilities to broader Imperial strategic objectives. The Crimson Fists found themselves making tactical and strategic decisions without the guidance from Sector Command that had traditionally influenced their operational planning, requiring chapter leadership to develop greater expertise in intelligence analysis and strategic planning. This increased autonomy provided opportunities for tactical innovation while creating risks of strategic misalignment with broader Imperial military objectives. The reconstruction of the chapter's strength during the era Indomitus involved not only the integration of Primaris reinforcements, but also continued recruitment and training of traditional Astartes from Rynn's world's population. The dual recruitment streams created organizational complexity, as the chapter maintained separate training programs for conventional and enhanced Space Marines, while working to integrate both types of warriors into cohesive tactical formations. The different physical capabilities and equipment requirements of the two warrior types demanded modifications to standard tactical procedures that had been developed specifically for traditional Astartes capabilities. The establishment of new training facilities capable of accommodating both traditional and Primaris Marines required significant infrastructure investment that strained the chapter's limited resources while providing essential capabilities for long-term expansion. The enhanced physical capabilities of Primaris warriors demanded more robust training equipment and larger facility spaces, while their sophisticated weapons and armor required specialized maintenance areas that exceeded the requirements of conventional Space Marine equipment. The construction of these facilities required extensive cooperation with Adeptus Mechanicus engineers, who could provide the technical expertise necessary for building installations capable of supporting advanced Imperial technology. The cultural integration of Primaris Marines into the chapter's traditions required careful attention to preserving the identity and values that had sustained the Crimson Fists through their darkest periods, while adapting ceremonies and practices to accommodate warriors whose experiences differed significantly from those of traditional recruits. The Primaris Marines' creation in Mechanicus facilities, rather than through the gradual transformation process experienced by conventional Astartes, meant that they lacked the shared experiences of recruitment trials and progressive enhancement that traditionally bonded Space Marine brothers. The chapter's chaplains developed modified indoctrination programs that could instill appropriate loyalty and understanding of chapter traditions, while respecting the different backgrounds that Primaris warriors brought to their service. The technological upgrades that accompanied Primaris integration extended beyond personal equipment to include improvements in communication systems, medical facilities, and manufacturing capabilities that enhanced the chapter's overall operational effectiveness. The advanced medical equipment required for maintaining Primaris physiology provided benefits for treating conventional Astartes as well, while the improved manufacturing capabilities enabled local production of specialized ammunition and equipment that had previously required external procurement. These technological improvements reduced the chapter's dependence on external supply chains, while providing capabilities that enhanced their strategic flexibility and operational independence. The fleet modifications necessary to accommodate Primaris Marines and their equipment required extensive retrofitting of existing vessels, while incorporating new ship designs that had been developed specifically for enhanced Space Marine operations. The larger physical size of Primaris warriors and their equipment demanded modifications to troop compartments, armories, and maintenance facilities throughout the chapter's fleet, while the advanced technology they employed required upgraded power systems and specialized storage areas. The integration of new vessel types into the existing fleet created training challenges for crews who had to learn to operate unfamiliar systems while maintaining the tactical coordination essential for effective space-based operations. The strategic role of the Crimson Fists within the broader Indomitus crusade reflected both their specialized capabilities and their ongoing reconstruction efforts, as Guilliman's military planners sought to maximize the effectiveness of available resources while accounting for the limitations imposed by reduced chapter strength. The assignment of specific operational objectives took into consideration the chapter's expertise in urban warfare and siege operations, while recognizing that their reduced numbers limited their ability to undertake major independent campaigns. The balance between utilizing the chapter's specialized skills and avoiding overextension required careful coordination with other Imperial forces that could provide the numerical strength necessary for large-scale operations. The defense of the low-key sector against emerging threats required the Crimson Fists to coordinate with multiple Imperial military organizations while maintaining their primary responsibilities to Rynn's world and the surrounding systems. The disruption of established command structures following the Great Rift's opening created opportunities for enemy forces to exploit gaps in Imperial defenses, requiring rapid response capabilities that could address multiple simultaneous threats across the sector's vast expanse. The chapter's improved mobility, provided by Primaris equipment and modified fleet capabilities, enabled more effective coverage of their assigned operational area while maintaining adequate defensive strength at critical locations. The ongoing recruitment efforts required to achieve full Codex-compliant strength involved expanding beyond the traditional sources on Rynn's world to include populations from other worlds within the low-key sector that had demonstrated appropriate characteristics for space marine transformation. The establishment of recruitment networks on multiple worlds provided greater resilience against potential disruption while ensuring adequate candidate pools for both traditional and Primaris enhancement procedures. The management of these expanded recruitment operations required additional personnel and resources that strained the chapter's administrative capabilities while providing essential foundations for long-term growth. The development of new tactical doctrines that incorporated Primaris capabilities while preserving the defensive expertise that defined the chapter's identity required extensive experimentation and analysis of combat performance data collected during actual operations. The enhanced physical capabilities of Primaris Marines enabled tactical approaches that had been impossible for conventional Astartes, while their improved equipment provided capabilities that could be integrated into existing defensive strategies to enhance overall effectiveness. The process of doctrinal development involved collaboration between veteran sergeants who understood traditional tactics and Primaris leaders who could identify opportunities for employing enhanced capabilities. The future challenges facing the Crimson Fists in the era Indomitus include not only the immediate threats posed by Chaos forces and Xenos invasions, but also the long-term strategic implications of the galaxy's division and the ongoing evolution of Imperial military doctrine. The chapter's position within the Imperium Nihilus places them on the front lines of humanity's struggle for survival, while limiting their access to reinforcements and supplies from Terra and Mars. The development of self-sufficiency capabilities becomes essential for maintaining operational effectiveness in an environment where external support may be unavailable for extended periods. The integration of new technologies and tactical innovations continues to present both opportunities and challenges as the chapter adapts to capabilities that exceed anything available during their previous operational history. The balance between embracing beneficial improvements and maintaining the cultural identity that has sustained them through previous crises requires careful consideration of how changes might affect unit cohesion and tactical effectiveness. The successful navigation of these challenges will determine whether the Crimson Fists can achieve their goal of restoration to full operational strength while preserving the characteristics that have defined their service to the Imperium. As the 42nd millennium dawns, the Crimson Fists stand as a testament to the resilience and determination that have characterized the Imperial Fists gene line since the days of the Great Crusade. Their recovery from near extinction through the catastrophic events on Rynn's world demonstrates the enduring strength of Rogal Dorn's legacy, while their adaptation to the challenges of the era Indomitus proves their continued relevance within the Imperium's evolving military structure. The chapter's future remains unwritten, but their commitment to defending humanity against all threats ensures that the Crimson Gauntlet will continue to serve as a symbol of protection and sacrifice for generations yet to come. The bonds forged between veteran survivors and newly arrived Primaris Marines have created a stronger, more versatile fighting force that combines traditional expertise with enhanced capabilities, positioning the chapter to face whatever threats the dark millennium ahead may bring. Their fortress-monastery rises once again from Rynn's world's peaks, its walls rebuilt stronger than before, housing both ancient traditions and cutting-edge technology in service of the Emperor's vision for humanity's future. The Crimson Fists march forward into an uncertain galaxy, their numbers growing, their resolve unshaken, ready to stand as humanity's shield against the darkness that threatens to consume all.